She was just reading a novel when she fell asleep. When she woke up, she was someone else. Same body, different woman. And the woman whose life she'd just inherited had spent years making her daughter-in-law's existence a living hell, controlling who she could see, what she could wear, showing up uninvited just to remind everyone in the room who held the power, the kind of woman you root against, the kind of woman who gets executed at the end. She had 3 years before that happened. And a husband who had already filed for divorce. 100 days left on the clock, both of them still living in the same house, pretending the air between them wasn't doing something neither of them planned for. He was supposed to hate her. She was supposed to let him, but then he carried her across a courtyard without being asked, cut fruit from a tree just to hand it to her, showed up everywhere she was and called it nothing. And she, a woman who knew exactly how this story was written, who had read every chapter, who knew who ends up with who and who ends up in ashes, started wondering if maybe the author left something out. We begin the story with a blonde-haired woman, deep in thought, reflecting on how she always believed unbelievable things only happened to other people, never to herself. Then, snapping out of her daydream, the young woman asks herself what is happening at that very moment. She finds herself lying beside a man and immediately wonders if this is a lucid dream, since not long ago she believes she had dozed off while reading a romance novel. I think this falls into a different category of dream, if you know what I mean. So we go back just a few minutes earlier and see the protagonist reading and becoming outraged by the cruelty of the mother-in-law in the novel. She knows it is only a book, but she still finds it absurd. Because of that, our reader understands why that horrible character is divorced. What husband would put up with such a shrew of a woman, right? Letting her imagination run wild, the protagonist even fantasizes about the scene where the husband hands the divorce papers to the villain. However, after learning about the divorce, Ellen, the evil mother-in-law, used a deadly poison to cause Layla's baby to die. That woman is truly awful. But later, when Malbor became king and discovered the whole truth, he ordered Ellen to be arrested and executed immediately. She was sentenced to be burned at the stake, and that terrible woman met a fatal end, as the protagonist recounts the novel she had been reading. Thus, after thinking so much about Ellen's wickedness, our reader starts to become drowsy, who has never gotten a little sleepy after reading. The protagonist places the book over her face and decides to take a break and go to sleep. And remembering everything that happened just minutes earlier, she concludes that becoming blonde and waking up beside a man can only be a dream. In the supposed dream, the young woman turns toward the man and calls out to him. Unexpectedly, he snaps back in irritation because the protagonist treated him like a stranger and does not even know the name of her own husband. The woman with the vivid imagination is also surprised that the young man actually responds to her, but she realizes that is not the most important thing at the moment. The man introduces himself as Count Philip Morris, the protagonist's husband. Looking at him, the protagonist concludes that if he is Philip Morris, Layla's father-in-law, the heroine of the novel she was reading earlier, then that means she is Ellen? Of all the roles I could have had in a dream, I had to be the villain? It would have been much cooler to be the heroine, thinks the protagonist. However, the sight of her husband makes her change her mind immediately. She thinks that perhaps the villain's point of view is not so bad after all. But at that exact moment, the Count tells her to stop acting as if she knows nothing, because behaving that way will not erase her signature from the divorce papers. Thus, the protagonist comes to understand that the scene she is dreaming about takes place after Philip asked Ellen for a divorce. She soon remembers that, in the novel, Ellen said she would sign the divorce papers if her husband spent one night with her. The scene forms in the protagonist's mind, with Ellen standing before her husband and saying that the night should be exactly like their honeymoon. She even asks if he does not remember what it was like and makes a point of reminding him that it happened twice. Outraged and holding the papers in his hands, Philip comments that his wife does not have even a shred of shame. Soon, the Count hands over the documents and says that these are the divorce papers. He then says that the final paperwork will be ready soon, but since he no longer loves Ellen, he will not kiss her tonight. Knowing all this, the protagonist realizes that her dream takes place precisely during the scene in which Count Philip fulfills his wife's request. Still, she wonders whether anything else will happen, but quickly dismisses the thought because this is only a dream, isn't it? That is what we are about to find out, my dear protagonist. However, still thinking like a fanfiction reader, she considers it a waste to give up a man as handsome as Philip. The next morning, Ellen wakes up asking the questions anyone would ask. What time is it? Where is my phone? And complaining that she does not want to go to work today. She is just like the rest of us. Looking to the side, she notices a young man lying in the same bed and wonders why on earth there is a man in her house. Poor thing, our protagonist still has not fully grasped the situation. Then she looks at her own clothes and at the room and finally notices that everything around her has changed. Noticing his wife's behavior, the Count asks what happened. But at that moment, the protagonist's thoughts are far from clear, and her only reaction is to kick Philip and call him a pervert. The poor nobleman understands nothing and asks why Ellen is acting like this. He had better stay alert because he has already seen that this woman is aggressive. Still irritated, Ellen asks whether he is pretending to be clueless or if he genuinely does not know. Then she asks if the Count did that to her, and he replies that of course he did, because she herself had asked them to do it not once, but twice. Ellen asks what Philip is talking about, but before she can finish her sentence, she seems to begin understanding the situation, and the Count quickly exclaims that she was the one who asked for all of it. Hearing that she herself had wanted what happened, the protagonist becomes more and more outraged. To make matters worse, Philip comments on how ecstatic Ellen claimed she had been the previous night. As a result, the Countess becomes so frantic that even the maids come in to calm her down, and one of them even stands in front of her to stop her from doing anything else reckless. Soon, the protagonist reflects on why the maids called her My Lady, making her question once again whether this is really just a dream. The Count's expression changes, and he asks if this is the tantrum his wife has decided to throw now. Studying him, Ellen realizes that Philip is clearly holding himself back because he is not the kind of man she could defeat in a fight. The man is a father-in-law and still in excellent shape. Philip says that she is probably trying to change his mind with this absurd performance, but he has already submitted everything that needed to be sent to the court. So no matter what she does now, they have already entered the divorce deliberation period starting today. Those words leave the protagonist even more confused. Irritated, the Count vents that he was already tired of this hellish marriage. Then, turning his back on Ellen, he says that he prays those 100 days will pass as quickly as possible. The protagonist simply watches and wonders if this is really what she thinks it is. Finally, Philip warns her not to lay a finger on the children when they return next week. He will not let it slide again. Afterward, one of the maids informs Ellen that they will be waiting for her outside. Everyone leaves, and our protagonist is left alone in the room, with only her own thoughts for company. Then at last, she looks at herself in the mirror and wonders who this woman she has become really is. Thus, the young woman realizes that she truly is not dreaming. In disbelief, she wonders whether she has somehow taken over the villainous Ellen's body and knows she must figure it out immediately. She leaves the room and finds her 4 maids looking rather uncomfortable with the situation, while one of them once again calls her My Lady. Being extremely direct, the protagonist asks the women where the man from earlier went and who she is, but she soon realizes that she sounded far too harsh and wonders why that happened. Trembling with fear, one of the servants explains that Count Philip has gone to his office and that the protagonist is the most beautiful countess in the world, Ellen Bourbon Morris. Our reader asks once again if she is truly Ellen, Countess Morris from the novel, and mutters that this cannot be happening. There is nowhere left to run now. She cannot believe that she has taken over the body of this villainess. In response to the protagonist's question, all the maids immediately bow, and the same servant from before apologizes, explaining that now that the divorce papers have been sent to the court, the Countess is, from today onward, Lady Ellen Bourbon de Lenoir. At first, Ellen does not understand why the maids are acting this way and apologizing every other moment. She soon concludes that if she is really in the body of a villainess, she should act like one to avoid raising suspicion. So she orders those pests to stop being useless and get back to work. However, even though she has to act cruelly, the protagonist's conscience weighs heavily on her, and she wonders whether that was not a little too harsh. But she soon hears one of the maids in the background commenting that she cannot believe what just happened. Ellen understands why they are upset, considering how badly she has treated them. However, the protagonist discovers that the maids were not upset. On the contrary, they thought she had been far too lenient, as they had expected much harsher punishments. One of them even comments that Ellen was kind, and perhaps it is because of the divorce documents. Our reader can only imagine just how cruel Ellen must have been, and catching a glimpse of Ellen's appearance, the protagonist assumes that someone that beautiful could have anything she wanted and cannot understand why the villainess spent her time plotting nothing but evil deeds. In any case, she thinks that what she needs to do now is familiarize herself with the environment she is in. Her intention is to avoid suffering a horrible death, just like Ellen did in the story. The Countess suggests using the maids to— but before she can finish her train of thought, one of them exclaims that she has brought her meal. With that, Ellen simply tells her to come in. Soon the scene shifts and we see Ellen sitting before a grand banquet, where she eats and declares it delicious, a culinary masterpiece. Our protagonist is moved by eating something so wonderful and perfectly suited to her tastes. Even the coffee is worth mentioning, and she realizes that if it were not for Ellen's villainy, this would be a wonderful life to live. Where else would I have all this luxury, she thinks. Afterward, Ellen decides that she wants to take a walk, and the maids immediately volunteer to assist her. The protagonist reflects that all she has to do is say a single word, and they will do anything for her at once. Thus, several outfits are presented to the Countess, and after examining them all, she notices a blue dress decorated with flowers and decides to wear it because she finds it very beautiful. Dressed in the outfit she chose, Ellen goes for a walk through the gardens of her mansion and sees with her own eyes how beautiful the place is. She notices the presence of a gardener and wonders whether he takes care of such a massive garden all by himself. The moment the gardener notices the Countess, he does not hesitate and immediately leaves. The protagonist does not understand why and wonders if he is afraid of her. Then a few seconds later, Ellen hears a voice asking whether she would like him to go after the gardener for her. Turning around instantly, the protagonist comes face to face with a red-haired man she has never seen before. Without recognizing him, she asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Igor Mild and says that he has been by Ellen's side since she was 10 years old. He then adds that Ellen had promised to stop making that kind of joke with him. Surprised, the protagonist wonders whether the villainess used to play these pranks on Higor before she took over her body, and she feels relieved because her behavior did not seem strange to him. So she simply turns her back on Higor and comments on how boring this all is. The young woman is playing the role of a snobbish villainess quite well. She is ready to win an Oscar. As she walks through the garden, Ellen is followed by the maids and by Higor himself, and noticing that she is being accompanied, she turns around and asks why. With a simple smile, the redhead replies that he is following her because he is the Countess's loyal shadow. Upon hearing this, the protagonist remembers that the novel mentions Ellen having a personal knight. The book explains that after Layla's stepmother incurred King Malbor's wrath and was sentenced to execution, her knight was ultimately killed by Philip's sword after attempting to resist the death sentence. Symbolically, the knight's name is mentioned only at the beginning of the story. Throughout the remaining pages, he is referred to simply as Ellen's shadow. Recalling Malbor's role in the novel, the protagonist realizes that at least she will have one ally in this place. An entire week passes, and where was Ellen during all that time? Lying in bed complaining about her back, of course. Deep in thought, she considers the execution that, according to her calculations, will take place in roughly 3 years. She then questions whether it is possible to change the future and prevent such a thing from happening. My punishment only happened because I tormented the protagonist, so if I do the opposite, will I survive? She asks herself. She quickly concludes with relief that she will not be executed if she does nothing wrong. Beginning to make plans, Ellen remembers that the newlyweds are arriving this afternoon, and the first thing she needs to do is get along with them. She thinks that if she can build a pleasant relationship with them, they will probably grow fond of her. Later, after going to the study and making herself comfortable, she decides that she will use the sunshine policy. Thus, she explains that according to the family law of the Kingdom of Cigarette, 2 documents must be submitted for a divorce to be finalized: the divorce application and the divorce confirmation. And the document Philip took with him last week was the divorce application. Because of this, the couple must wait through a 100-day deliberation period from the moment the paperwork is submitted. During that time, the couple is forbidden from separating, no matter how much they hate each other. The protagonist understands all of this, but the divorce confirmation document can be sent to the court at any point during the deliberation period. After that, it is sealed immediately and opened only once the 100 days have passed. Then the judge reviews the case, and if either member of the couple still wants the divorce, the request is approved. However, if neither of us requests the divorce, or if both of us cancel the request, can the decision be overturned? Ellen wonders. Still, the protagonist also remembers that the division of assets after the divorce is decided by the head of the household, and she does not like that one bit. According to the book, the Count gave Ellen a small house. The protagonist finds that acceptable, but compared to Philip's entire fortune, it is practically nothing. Soon, she wonders whether she should cling to the Count and beg him to cancel the divorce so that he might grant her more benefits after the separation. But within a few seconds, she remembers that things are not quite like that, and that she is going to receive a fortune anyway. With that money, she will be able to live luxuriously, even after leaving the nobleman behind. Having reached a conclusion, Ellen stamps the divorce papers and calls for her loyal knight, who promptly answers. Handing the documents to him, the Countess asks him to deliver everything to the court. Higor asks if this is truly what his lady wants, and the protagonist replies that it is, because that is simply how life works. People get divorced, and life goes on. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Ellen also asks whether Mild will continue protecting her even if she gets divorced. Immediately, the knight replies that he will, because he swore before God to protect her for the rest of his life. The protagonist is somewhat moved by this declaration and allows her faithful companion to leave. He gives a brief bow and says that he will be on his way to take care of his duties. Thus, our protagonist realizes that there is one more person she must save in this story, her loyal and kind knight. Later, seeing her maid approach, Ellen asks when the children will arrive, and the servant replies that it will be in 2 hours. Ellen then asks whether they should be at the main gate to greet them, and the other woman confirms that they should. With the smile of a wealthy villainess, the Countess remarks that she had better get ready for the occasion, leaving the maid quite surprised. The protagonist notices the young woman's expression and wonders what happened to make her look so startled. Reflecting on it, Ellen comments to herself that at first, this whole situation of being misunderstood was rather unsettling, but after a week of it, she has become accustomed to it. Besides, she and the Count will no longer see each other after the 100 days are over, so there is nothing to worry about. We then pass through scenes of the Countess getting ready, and once again, the protagonist notices how astonishingly beautiful Ellen is. Looking at herself in the mirror, she once again thinks about how the villainess was blessed with breathtaking beauty and cannot understand why she chose a life of envy, obsession, and malice. Because of that, the protagonist becomes even more determined to resolve everything she needs to resolve and then live a life worthy of a woman as beautiful as Ellen. After finishing her preparations, the Countess asks the maids to remove the ornaments from her hair, and they obey, though somewhat surprised. Our favorite villainess feels much better without those things on her head because they are quite heavy. Then, looking absolutely radiant, Ellen declares that she is ready to go. Thus, the protagonist heads toward the main gate, receiving respectful bows from the household staff, and comes face to face with Philip, her husband. Impressed, the Count thinks about how beautiful and elegant his wife looks. The sight reminds Philip of the time he entered into an arranged marriage with Ellen. At first, Ellen had no major complaints, even though she knew about the Count's adopted son, the young Malbor. However, she began to change when she realized how exceptional the boy was, and became afraid that he would inherit the family instead of her own biological son. No matter how many times the prince told Ellen not to worry, the villainess never believed him and only continued tormenting Malbor even more. Philip knows he could have endured that, but after a dramatic pause, it is revealed to us that Malbor is actually the king's secret son. However, Philip could never reveal this because he had made a pact with the monarch to keep it hidden. Observing his wife, the Count reflects that he can no longer live with her and that any other man would never have endured her for so long. As they stare at one another, Morris asks himself who could possibly have the courage to live with a woman as cruel as Ellen. Noticing her piercing gaze, he also wonders whether she is plotting something. Today especially, she looks wonderful, a thought slips through his mind. But immediately afterward, he dismisses the idea and tries not to give in to such temptation. A few seconds pass, and Philip realizes that his wife is staring at him. He asks about it, and Ellen returns to the subject of when she ended up hitting him the previous week. The Count asks what she is getting at, and he quickly assumes that she intends to humiliate him publicly over the incident in front of the household staff. To his surprise, the noblewoman merely says that she was wondering whether he is feeling better now. The protagonist then reveals that she knew Ellen's swordsmanship skills were comparable to those of a knight, and her combat techniques were incredible as well. She knew exactly where it would hurt the most and struck every one of the Count's weak points. Remembering all of this, our villainess says that nothing like that will happen again. As a result, Morris can only stare at her in complete shock and let out a very confused "what?" Then he asks why she did that to him in the first place. Ellen promptly replies that she was simply frightened. Hearing his wife's answer, Philip asks what she had been frightened of, and the Countess retorts that she opened her eyes and suddenly found a man lying beside her. Philip begins explaining what happened, but Ellen interrupts him by saying that she completely forgot what happened that night. Surprised, her husband questions her, since Ellen had practically begged for all of it while stamping the divorce documents. The villainess admits that may very well be true, but says that people can sometimes forget things when they are sleepy. Deep down, the reader within her remembers that Philip was a respectable supporting character in the novel, and cannot understand why he is being so clueless. Thoughtfully, the nobleman asks whether she was very satisfied, or to use her own words, whether the night had been absolutely incredible. Filled with embarrassment, the protagonist repeats, "absolutely incredible," and wonders if she should hit him again right now. While the two of them continue their conversation, the staff members simply pretend they are not listening. Stammering and looking somewhat awkward, Philip wants to know whether his wife is questioning him because she genuinely does not remember saying that, since he clearly recalls her using those exact words. Abruptly, the protagonist grabs her husband by the shirt and leans close to his ear, whispering whether he is a pervert for continuing to talk about such things. "Didn't I make it perfectly clear back then that it was useless?" Ellen asks. This revelation leaves the Count bewildered because from his perspective, Ellen had loved what they had done that night. As a result, he assumes that she is lying in an attempt to stop the divorce and wonders if the villainess really thinks he is going to fall for that trick again. After their conversation, time passes and the carriage carrying the couple arrives at the Count's estate. The protagonist is astonished by the young woman's beauty. She cannot believe that such a graceful heroine is her daughter-in-law. Seeing her in person, it becomes very clear to our reader that Ellen had always been completely wrong. Our fanfiction-loving protagonist knows that Ellen was written to be a villainess, but she cannot understand how anyone could mistreat a girl as lovely as this one. At that very moment, she promises herself that she will do everything she can to make things easy and pleasant for her daughter-in-law. With the classic expression of a villainess, Ellen calls for Layla, and the young woman responds with a frightened look. At that exact instant, Ellen's demeanor changes and she warmly welcomes her daughter-in-law. She wraps the heroine in a hug and greets her affectionately, but the young woman can only think about how terrifying her mother-in-law is. Soon afterward, the protagonist tells Layla to get some rest and says that they will see each other again later at the tea party. Turning to Malbor, Ellen asks whether he is not going to greet them as well. Quickly, Malbor tells his parents that they have finally arrived home and gives them a small bow. Ellen even nudges her husband, thinking that he is behaving like an idiot. As a result, a somewhat flustered Philip welcomes the couple. Acting almost like the heroine herself, the Countess invites everyone inside and announces that she has prepared pie and black tea. Philip still cannot understand what has happened to his wife. Malbor meanwhile grows curious and wants to know what happened in his home while he was away. Layla, on the other hand, thinks that Ellen becomes even scarier whenever she acts kind like this. And so, this completely dysfunctional family ends up gathered together in the sitting room. Soon, a man approaches carrying several gifts, and upon seeing him, Ellen remembers that Domingo, this butler, will unfortunately die soon. According to the novel, the old man dies after suffering 3 accidents, and the villainess merely mocks the fact that the old man has finally passed away. Afterward, she drinks with Sir Mild until she goes far beyond her limits. Trying to come up with a plan, the protagonist reflects that it would be strange if she simply told the employee about the future, but she also cannot just pretend that the accident is not going to happen. So she asks Domingo whether he intends to go buy camellia oil. Startled, the butler asks how she knows that. At this rate, people are going to think our reader is a fortune teller, or worse, that she is actually a witch. Thus, she proceeds to give Domingo the entire route he would need to follow. First, she says that he might get robbed, so it would be better to have someone escort him or send a messenger boy ahead. Then she tells him to be careful with the horse, and especially in front of the tavern where he will encounter a woman or someone of that sort. With a slight bow, the butler thanks his lady. However, the protagonist knows that he does not believe her, and that she would not believe her own words either if she were in his place. After that, they continue their conversation, and Ellen asks when he plans to buy the camellia oil. He replies that in 3 days he will pick up a reserved order at Madame Hetty's boutique because the highest quality products from the merchants of Lenoir are delivered there. Ellen remembers that Lenoir was her family name before she got married. Philip asks whether that is not the merchant guild run by his wife's older brother, and she wonders if that is actually true. The Count also comments that Ellen hates her own brother very much, and the protagonist asks whether he is serious. Completely confused, she asks since when she has had a brother. Her husband then remarks that if she hates her brother that much, it is probably best to pretend he does not exist. Thus, the protagonist decides that she should simply ignore the things she does not know. Time passes, and Ellen notices that Layla is watching her, waiting to see what kind of reaction her mother-in-law will have. Our protagonist remembers that the novel describes the gift the couple gave Ellen. However, the villainess only found faults with it, and unleashed every kind of complaint and insult imaginable. Now, however, glowing with enthusiasm, she reassures herself that she is on her dear daughter-in-law's side, unlike the villainess from the novel. Picking up the gift, she thinks that she should give them the most exaggerated expression of joy possible. Meanwhile, looking somewhat downcast, the heroine comments that she hopes her mother-in-law likes the gift. The protagonist then opens the box and finds a beautiful dress inside. She is genuinely surprised and realizes she did not even need to force her reaction because the sigh of admiration came naturally. Holding the dress in her hands, she praises it, saying that she cannot believe a dress could be both so beautiful and so comfortable. She gracefully poses with her new gift, and both Philip and Malbor are left amazed. Even Domingo has to intervene, asking whether the young master is feeling all right. Afterward, Ellen asks where Layla found such an elegant dress, thanks her, and says that she will wear it proudly. The heroine replies that she is very happy to see her mother-in-law happy. To surprise everyone even further, the Countess takes Layla's hands and says that her daughter-in-law has been through a lot, so she should please consider the mansion her own home and make herself comfortable. Tears begin to fall from Layla's eyes, and no one in the room can believe what they have just heard. Adding to that, the noblewoman says that if Malbor ever does anything wrong to Layla, she should simply tell her. Still holding the heroine's little hands, Ellen stares at Malbor and threatens him. If he causes you any trouble at all, I will simply… Interrupting the moment, Philip asks where his gift is. At once, Domingo apologizes and places the wrapped box beside his master. The Count looks at the clothing he received, thanks them, but says that he has something he needs to tell the two of them. Then, very directly, he reveals that he and his wife signed the divorce papers a week ago. The newlywed couple is shocked by the announcement. The Count then explains that after the deliberation period is over, Ellen will leave the mansion. He adds that of course it would not be appropriate for his wife to remain there afterward, and therefore he assumes he cannot use the gift. With that, he asks Domingo to take both outfits and store them properly. Indignant, Ellen asks whether he intends to do that with her dress as well, and he immediately counters by asking whether that is not the most sensible thing to do. A heated argument soon begins. Ellen says that she is going to wear the dress. The Count replies that he has no intention of wearing his gift. His wife retorts that she does not care whether he wears it or not. Philip then concludes that the divorce is not going to be reversed anyway. Ellen fires back, saying that no one was talking about reversing the divorce and that he should not count his chickens before they hatch. Comically, the Count has no idea what that expression means. So the protagonist explains that it means he should not climb into a carriage to attend a party without being invited. Thus, Ellen says that if the Count does not want to wear the outfit, then he should give it to her. But he refuses, saying that the clothes were purchased so that they could wear them together. Even so, his wife continues insisting, pointing out that her husband himself said he was not going to wear it. Using her own phrase against her, Philip retorts by telling the villainess not to count her chickens before they hatch. After that, he comments that he liked the gift, but he cannot use it precisely because he cannot wear it matching with his wife. Malbor adds that he bought one outfit for each of them from the same set. Bringing her teacup to her lips, Ellen continues teasing and says that, in that case, Philip will not need his outfit. After taking a sip of tea, the protagonist confirms that she truly will leave the house when the 100-day period ends. Very directly, the Countess asks that when they divorce and she returns to her status as a duke's daughter, her husband do her the favor of giving her a decent house. And don't even think about giving me some two-story little house tucked away in an alley with cheap wallpaper slapped on the walls, she warns. Confused, Philip asks whether he has ever even brought up the subject of alimony. Ellen denies it, saying that she only mentioned it because she knows it is exactly the kind of thing he would do. Bringing the matter to a close, she tells everyone that she is leaving now and that the couple should make themselves comfortable and enjoy a good rest. She also tells herself that she does not even want to think about barging into the newlyweds' room during the night. The scene then shifts and we see Ellen strolling through her beautiful garden. Soon she pauses for a moment and looking around realizes that the place would be an excellent spot for a photograph. She laments that she would love to take a picture of herself exactly as she is now with such stunning looks. Our protagonist laughs like a classic wealthy lady and can hardly believe that she has transformed into a noble woman. Then Ellen's shadow approaches, and his mistress asks the knight whether something good has happened. He apologizes, and the countess says that she is curious about why he smiled a moment ago. With complete sincerity, Mild simply replies that Ellen seems to be in a good mood. Surprised, the protagonist reflects on how Higor is happy simply because she appears to be in a good mood, and she becomes even more determined not to let such a kind-hearted knight die. Looking elegant as ever, Ellen remembers that Layla is having a tea party today, so she must first make a good impression on her and her daughter-in-law's friends. Layla had said it would take place in the garden, but the protagonist cannot find them and wonders where they might be. Soon, Mild approaches and asks what his lady is looking for. She explains that Layla said she was going to host a tea party, but she cannot find her. Ellen adds that the heroine mentioned it would be held where the roses were in full bloom, which is why she thought it would be around there. Ah, so that's why the maids were preparing things so quietly, the knight comments. The countess then asks whether Sir Mild did not know about it either. Despite that, the protagonist understands why Layla wanted to keep it a secret, because in the novel, Ellen tormented the girl relentlessly, but she cannot give up on trying to change things. So the noblewoman asks whether, based on what Mild has seen, he has any idea where the tea party is taking place. He replies that it might be in the back garden. Ellen asks the knight about this garden, and he explains that since Layla's friends are not from noble families, he imagines they must be gathering near the wisteria trees by the lake. Adjusting her hair, the countess asks the knight to lead the way. He comments that it will be quite a long walk and asks whether he should prepare a horse or a carriage. The protagonist immediately remembers that in the novel, Ellen arrived at the tea party, ruined everything, and caused a tremendous scene. After those dreadful images from the book pass through the reader's mind, she reflects that she should approach calmly, speak kindly, and simply tell them to enjoy their party. Thus, she tells the knight that there is no need for a carriage because the girls are probably already frightened and that they should simply walk there. As the pair heads toward the back garden, they come across two maids, and Ellen asks where they are going. The servants stammer a little, and the protagonist presses them by asking what is inside the basket. The two women reply that there is nothing inside. Smiling, Ellen orders them to open the basket. After they do so, she asks whether all that food is for Layla's tea party. One of the maids is surprised that her mistress knows about the party, while the other apologizes, explaining that Layla was the one who asked her to bring it. The protagonist then asks them to hand the basket over to her, and says that they do not need to worry because she was already on her way to Layla's tea party. Hesitantly, the two maids warn that the basket will become heavy during the walk. However, Ellen sees no problem with that, commenting that she has Sir Mild beside her to help if necessary. As they walk through the beautiful garden, Higor asks whether he should announce Ellen's arrival. She immediately replies that she is not attending the party to receive formal greetings, she simply wants to be there. Thoughtfully, she wonders how she should introduce herself and speak with Layla and her friends. It is a pleasure to meet you all. I am very happy that you are having so much fun. I brought cake and pie, and I hope you build a wonderful friendship with Layla. Ellen thinks, trying to plan what she will say and deciding that it should be enough. At that very moment, she hears a voice saying that they should not speak about her mother that way. She immediately asks the knight to be quiet and heads toward the voice. Upon finding Layla and her friends, Ellen remembers that the novel says the heroine's friends are peasants, though she wonders if they might actually come from middle-class families. She also recalls that no noble daughters ever visited the count's mansion because of Ellen's terrible behavior. Listening to the conversation, the protagonist hears someone once again saying not to speak badly about her mother-in-law. We then discover that it is Layla herself defending her. One of the friends tells the heroine to wake up and face reality because she cannot let her mother-in-law walk all over her. Another voice adds that the countess is very cruel. However, Layla repeats that they should stop saying such things because they have no idea how kind Ellen really is. One of the friends mockingly replies that even if Layla refuses to talk about her mother-in-law, rumors about her have already spread everywhere. The heroine responds that Ellen has been very kind to her and welcomed her warmly since she returned from her honeymoon. The protagonist is surprised because even after Ellen treated Layla so cruelly, the girl still continues to defend her, making her want even more to see her daughter-in-law happy. Still sounding hostile, the girls question the countess's warm reception. They comment that they heard Layla turned pale and trembled when she stood in front of her mother-in-law, and that she should not lie about it since many people have witnessed how she behaves around the villainess. Overflowing with gentleness, Layla replies that she simply has not yet lived up to her mother-in-law's expectations. Then, bringing the matter to a close, the friends point out that her in-laws are getting divorced anyway, so the heroine no longer needs to worry about the evil countess. Afterward, the brown-haired friend changes the subject and asks about Layla's first night, leaving the heroine confused. The girls laugh and the brunette continues by asking what she did in bed and insists that the protagonist of the novel tell them everything in detail. Uncomfortable, Layla asks how they can casually discuss something like that. Annoyed, the troublesome girl replies that they are friends and therefore can talk about such matters. She then throws it in Layla's face that she has no other friends because her awful mother-in-law forbade her from having noble friends. Watching the entire scene, Ellen's blood begins to boil, and she is outraged that they would provoke her sweet Layla in such a way. After that, even more maliciously, the supposed friends comment that, honestly, Layla needs to be kind to them because that is the only way they will continue spending time with her. One of them then asks if she can keep the dress Layla gave her. Layla immediately replies that of course she can, since it was a gift. Not satisfied, another opportunistic girl asks whether Layla has anything else she can give away, since she will now receive many things as the daughter-in-law of an important count. She says that it will probably be difficult for Layla to wear jewelry because of her tyrannical mother-in-law, so she asks whether Layla could give them some pieces every now and then. The heroine hesitates, and the friend immediately pressures her, asking whether jewelry is more important than friendship. Cornered, Layla replies that it is not like that at all. The complaints continue, and the same troublesome girl asks whether there is anything else to eat. Layla replies that the cake and pie should arrive shortly. The darker-haired girl complains that the tea party should have been planned in advance. Suddenly, surrounded by an overwhelming aura, the villainess of the story appears holding her parasol and says, "Layla, so this is where you're having your tea party with your friends." The atmosphere of the gathering changes instantly. In a threatening tone, Ellen says that it is a pleasure to meet them and that she is happy they are having such a wonderful time together. The peasant girls are left completely stunned. Giving a brief curtsy, Layla greets her mother-in-law, but the countess asks her to step aside for a moment. "I brought some cake and pie in place of the maids," says Ellen, and she immediately reflects that her original plan had been simply to place the food on the table and say something like, "Please enjoy yourselves with our Layla." But now she has changed her mind. She knows there are times when it is convenient to be in the role of the villainess. With a typically villainous expression, she simply orders them to eat everything she brought. Then she erupts in anger, calling the peasant girls rude little creatures, and shouting about how they could possibly treat her sweet Layla that way. Continuing, she adds that she heard everything they said and asks whether, just because Layla is kind and treats them well, they think they can behave as though she were some complete fool. Dropping to the ground, the common girls beg for forgiveness, admit that they were wrong, and plead for mercy from the noble lady. "She treats you as friends, and this is how you treat her. Where did you learn to have the audacity to behave like this?" Ellen asks with deep contempt. Once again, the most troublesome of the girls begs the countess for forgiveness and pity. Adjusting the basket and turning her back on them, the protagonist concludes her outburst by declaring that Layla does not need friends like them. However, suddenly, a man grabs the noble woman from behind, and Ellen shouts for him to let her go immediately. She says that those foolish little brats deserve a far harsher lesson than this. The man releases Ellen and asks her to maintain her dignity, causing her to turn around and realize that the man is none other than Philip, her husband. Lifting his wife onto his shoulder, the count says that he saw everything that happened while he was walking toward the area. He had been wondering what Ellen was doing hiding behind that wall, and then he witnessed her launch into that completely unnecessary outburst. At this point, the protagonist angrily demands that he put her down. The count then turns to a maid and asks her to clean up the area, while the peasant girls remain cowering on the ground in fear. "It is a shame that your rare tea party was ruined. I apologize," says Philip with perfect politeness. But Ellen immediately fires back, saying that Layla's so-called friends were the rude ones in this situation, and asking why he is the one apologizing. Still worked up, the protagonist warns that the girls were lucky today and orders them to leave immediately. Her husband quickly interrupts, exclaiming that she needs to calm down for God's sake. At this point, our Ellen has fully embraced the spirit of a street delinquent. Even while being carried back through the gates, she continues warning the peasant girls never to spend time with Layla again, never to contact her, and that she never wants to see them again. After the entire scene, we return to the inside of the mansion. The protagonist tries to explain herself, saying that she was genuinely trying to do something good for Layla. Her husband replies that he is sure she was. Then he continues by saying that Ellen has no right to say anything after ruining a tea party the way she did. The protagonist simply retorts that things did not turn out the way she wanted them to. The Count Philip recommends that his wife get some rest. However, Ellen asks that he at least listen to what she has to say so that he can understand what really happened. But in a cold tone, Morris says that he will investigate the situation himself. As she watches her husband leave, the noblewoman hears what sounds like a click. She rushes over to check and realizes that the door has been locked. "What does this mean? Are you locking me in here?" Ellen exclaims furiously. From the other side of the door, her husband replies that he did it to ensure the safety of the maids while he is away. Outraged, the protagonist asks who said she was going to torment the maids. As he walks away, the Count replies that she has done it before and that she should take this opportunity to cool her head. He will return shortly. Still furious, Ellen calls him an ignorant idiot and says that he is judging her without knowing anything. An hour passes, Philip returns, and Ellen immediately begins questioning whether it is not obvious by now that Layla's so-called friends were the ones at fault. The Count replies that the stories do not match. The girls claimed that the Countess appeared out of nowhere and caused a scene. Then Ellen asks what Layla had to say about everything. The Count explains that the heroine admitted that her friends had been harsh toward her, but asked that they be forgiven. As a result, Ellen cannot believe that her daughter-in-law is still trying to protect those friends after everything that happened. Still, she remarks that being too generous is not always a good thing. Morris then explains that Layla apologized and promised that she would cut ties with those friends and apologize to Ellen as well. The protagonist immediately says that this is actually very good, because now Layla will be able to make new friends and hopefully better ones. Cutting through Ellen's pose, Philip asks whether she has become forgetful or if she is simply being two-faced, and she does not understand what her husband means. "Wasn't it you who drove away all of Layla's noble friends in the first place?" the Count asks. Unable to defend herself against the accusation, Ellen can only awkwardly admit that she did indeed do that. Afterward, the Count takes his leave, and Ellen thinks about what a scoundrel her husband was for locking her up without a second thought, and not even apologizing afterward. With that, the protagonist remembers that she will be leaving this house soon and needs to start looking for a new place to live. The next day, the noblewoman takes her loyal knight with her to inspect some of the houses Philip had prepared for her. Out of the 10 houses the Count had selected, Ellen and Mild viewed the first 9 and then went to see the 10th one, the very house Ellen receives in the novel. It is the canonical house according to the story. Observing the area, the protagonist notes that the alley was full of trash and the path was so narrow that a carriage could not pass through it. She and Higor had to walk there on foot. The Countess then asks whether this is really the potential home her husband prepared for Ellen. She reflects that even if Philip had the face of an angel, an action like this makes him far less charming. As a result, she decides that instead of being cast out to a place like this, it would be better to take matters into her own hands and build her own fortune before the divorce. However, Ellen notices several people approaching her and immediately wonders whether they are looking for a fight. She asks herself whether she should tell Mild to run or whether they should stand and fight. Examining the alley and the suspicious men, the protagonist realizes that the passage is far too narrow for an easy escape. She soon wonders if that means their only option is to stay and fight. Right, I have Sir Mild by my side, so... Ellen thinks as she turns her gaze toward the knight, but something interrupts her. Startled, the peasants stare at Ellen, drop a bottle, and leave her confused by their reaction. Then they begin shouting at each other to run and immediately flee, leaving Ellen and Mild alone in the alley. They even abandon the other bottles they were carrying. Surprised, she wonders whether those people just ran away from her. Everyone in this world is afraid of this woman. She really is the bogeyman around here. They should be crawling on the ground instead of running away. Should I capture them and teach them a lesson? Mild asks coldly. However, Ellen refuses and asks whether those peasants know who she is. Mild replies that of course they do, since she is the lady of the Morris estates. Still in disbelief, the Countess wonders whether all those people fled simply because they were afraid of her, and what on earth she did to inspire so much fear. Sometime later, the lady and her knight continue walking until they come across more peasants. One of them stretches out a hand toward Ellen and calls her a princess. The little peasant is a young boy who expresses his hunger and says that even a single slice of bread would be a blessing. He begs her to show them her kindness. At that very moment, the boy's mother realizes that the woman her son is speaking to is not the princess. She quickly embraces her son and tells him to be quiet because that is not the princess but Countess Morris. However, the child tearfully protests that he is hungry. With a weary expression, the woman explains that her son has not eaten since yesterday and failed to recognize her. She then begs the Countess to forgive him. The boy also apologizes. Watching the scene unfold, the protagonist reflects on how terrible Ellen must have been if even a child fears her. Passing directly by the two of them, our noblewoman thinks that the best thing she can do is simply ignore them, and that this will be the greatest help she can offer. Trying to suppress her hesitation, the protagonist continues walking, but in the end, she cannot resist. She tosses a few coins to the needy mother and tells her to leave before anyone else sees her. Then she urges the woman to hurry and find something for her son to eat. At that, the young woman falls to the ground in gratitude and thanks Ellen profusely. The woman then leaves, and the Countess grumbles to herself a little. Higor discreetly watches his lady from the corner of his eye, and the protagonist asks whether something is wrong. The knight simply replies that it is the first time he has ever seen her give anything to the poor. Oops, I ended up handling that in a very emotional way, Ellen reflects. So she says that the peasant woman was unpleasant to look at and that she simply got rid of her as quickly as possible. She then asks whether Mild would have preferred her to do as he suggested and go after the woman to give her a beating. However, Ellen's shadow replies that this was not what he wanted at all, leading the protagonist to think that Higor is clearly not a bad person. He merely follows Ellen's cruel orders. But in the original story, the protagonist recalls, Mild is also branded as a villain, and dies alongside the Countess. Afterward, the noblewoman asks her knight to guide her along the way, and he obediently replies that her wishes are his command. Arriving at the house where Ellen was originally supposed to live in the novel, the protagonist tours the rooms and notices that there is not enough space for all the dresses she owns. Ellen would have no choice but to sell them, even though she hates the idea. As he looks around the house as well, Mild asks whether this is truly the mansion the Count prepared for them to live in. Ellen replies that it certainly seems that way. Outraged, the knight asks how Philip could possibly choose a house like this. Ellen answers that she has no intention of ever living there, but if the worst happens, he can take the first floor while she takes the second. "Madam, you cannot live here," exclaims the shadow, but the Countess drags him back to reality by pointing out that if this place has been given to her, then of course she would have to live there, and there is nothing she can do about it. The knight then asks whether she is truly planning to go through with the divorce. Ellen points out that he saw the documents being sent and asks whether he is against the idea of her divorce. Higor replies that the people of her homeland will not like it at all. However, Ellen says that she wants his opinion, not everyone else's. "That does not matter to me. The only thing I do not want is to see you unhappy, madam," Mild replies. "Do I look happy when I am at the mansion?" The Countess shoots back. The knight tries to say something, but the noblewoman cuts him off and answers for him, saying that she does not look happy there and that from now on she must think of a way to live well outside that house. Nevertheless, Mild insists that Ellen should reconsider the divorce. She responds that she has already signed the papers, and that is the end of the matter. She has absolutely no regrets about it. Concluding the conversation, the noblewoman reassures the knight and tells him not to worry because she would never live in a place like that, and for now he may take his leave. Even after hearing those words, Higor continues watching his lady from a distance with concern. Later, while riding in a carriage, Ellen comments that the place where they will be living from now on will be close to the city center. The knight asks whether they means that the house will belong to both of them. Settled comfortably in the carriage, the protagonist replies that from what she has heard, Mild is not planning to retire or change professions. He confirms that this is true. Ellen then says that in that case they will live together and the house will belong to both of them. The young swordsman smiles and says that he understands. However, a group of masked men catches Ellen's attention, and she remembers warning Domingo that he would run into a thief wearing a blue mask, which is why he should send a messenger to purchase the camellia oil. Thinking about it, she realizes that today should be the day they are supposed to collect the oil. With that in mind, she asks Mild whether he knows where Madame Hida's boutique is located. He replies that it is a little outside the city. They then discuss how the butler Domingo was heading there and has a reservation around 4 in the afternoon. Ellen asks whether he went with any bodyguards, but Higor answers that he did not. Already aware of what is supposed to happen, the protagonist says that they should go have dinner and then stop by the boutique around 4 o'clock. Several hours later, while still in the city, Ellen turns to Higor and asks for the time. The knight replies that it is already 4 o'clock. Immediately, Ellen tells them to head toward Madame Heddy's boutique, and Mild says that he will escort her. As they pass an alley, the Countess spots the same masked men from before and orders the carriage to stop. Higor hesitates for a moment. Growing impatient, the noblewoman jumps down from the carriage and once again shouts that she ordered it to stop, startling even the horse. Mild calls out to his lady, but she ignores him and runs toward the alley. While assaulting a man, the criminals talk among themselves, calling the victim stubborn and ordering him to hand over what they are demanding, while others suggest attacking him in a non-lethal manner. Seeing the scene, Ellen thinks about what an idiot the butler was, and that when someone warns you about something, you should make a point of listening. Holding her parasol and standing with the posture of a warrior, the protagonist appears and calls everyone there bastards. Without a second thought, she lands a flying kick on one of the bandits, and the others wonder what the hell that was and whether it was a woman. The girl has fully transformed into an action hero now. Injured, Domingo asks what Ellen is doing there. The Countess immediately fires back, asking why he did not listen to her and go pick up the oil with an escort. Standing before his lady, the butler hesitates as he tries to come up with an excuse. Meanwhile, one of the bandits approaches and asks who the hell she is. "I am the Countess of Morris," the protagonist exclaims. Annoyed, one of the criminals orders the others to seize her as well. But our girl is so incredible that she dodges her opponent like the protagonist of a shonen series. She spins her parasol like a sword and strikes the enemy right in that spot. "Looks like I went a little too deep," she thinks while the others stare in shock and call her every insult imaginable. Ellen then says that it was not intentional, but as long as nobody dies, everything is fine. She also reflects that in situations like these, she has to act tough. At that very moment, Mild steps forward and asks the noblewoman to stay behind him. She immediately asks whether he really thinks they can stop the gang with only a single knight. "Come at me with everything you've got, you bastards," roars Ellen's shadow. As everyone charges into battle, Ellen tells Mild to cover her right side. The knight immediately lands a strike on one of the bandits. Observing his mistress's skill, Mild asks about this incredible combat technique of the Countess, but she tells him to focus, deal with the thieves first, and they can talk afterward. However, after throwing a punch, the protagonist realizes that Ellen's body is actually very fragile and that every blow sends a tremendous shock through her. On the other side, Mild continues slicing through the enemies. Attempting one final push, the blonde criminal orders Domingo to hand over the camellia oil immediately. However, at that exact moment, the rest of his group comes running over calling for help, and he receives a powerful kick from Ellen. "Come with me," the protagonist says as she grabs the butler's hand. Domingo apologizes to his lady, and she asks what could possibly be so important about that oil that he was willing to get beaten up over it. She questions whether it is more important than his life and scolds him, saying that he could simply have handed over the oil and bought more later. With his face swollen, the butler apologizes again and says that he just... Domingo's sentence is cut short when even more criminals appear and continue shouting to get rid of these bastards. Holding a stone, Ellen orders Domingo to leave immediately and report the situation to the guards. However, the butler insists that she should leave with him as well. Throwing the stone, she strikes a masked man's head with perfect accuracy. The butler praises her aim. Ellen then asks why Domingo is still standing there and tells him to hurry up and leave. The butler nods and asks her to hold on for just a little longer. Armed and furious, the masked men shout for the noblewoman to disappear once and for all. But Ellen quickly disarms her opponent, driving the bandits into even greater panic as they once again yell for someone to deal with this woman. "Madam, run. You won't survive if you fight alone," Mild shouts. But Ellen ignores the warnings, attacks the enemies, and taking up a proper stance, thinks about how amazing she is and that she must surely be an Olympic gold medalist. Suddenly, she hears a voice shouting, "Get all of them." She turns around to see where it came from. To her surprise, the protagonist finds herself staring at a large group of soldiers and then at Philip himself mounted on horseback. As the guards charge forward at full speed, the bandits shout to each other to run away. The guards quickly capture one of the masked men and order him not to move unless he wants to lose his life. Climbing down from his horse, Philip asks whether Ellen is all right. Confused, the protagonist wonders whether she just heard concern in her husband's voice because as far as she knows, Philip despises Ellen. Thus, she replies that nothing is seriously wrong. A moment later, they hear a noise, see the aftermath of Ellen's handiwork, and she thinks that must have hurt like hell. Concerned, Mild appears and asks whether Ellen is all right. She replies that she is. However, the protagonist notices something else and wonders what it might be. Watching the conversation between her husband and the butler, Ellen asks herself what Domingo is holding and whether it might be that letter. Smiling, Philip praises the employee's work, and the man replies that he only managed to be all right thanks to Ellen. However, the Count looks at his wife suspiciously. Giving a slight bow, Domingo thanks Ellen for rescuing him. Meanwhile, the protagonist reflects that things are becoming very different from the original story of the novel, and she hopes that nothing bad will happen because of it. Examining the mysterious letter, Morris asks whether his wife knew about those documents. She does not understand where he is going with this, and her husband asks once again whether she did not know. With a dark expression, Ellen asks whether he is implying that she is suspicious simply because she knew something about what had just happened. Philip immediately replies that this is not exactly what he meant. "What do you mean that's not what you meant? You clearly accused me," the Countess exclaims. The Count responds once again that she is misunderstanding him, because if she had been working together with the bandits, there would have been no reason for her to leak that information in the first place. "Anyway, those kicks of yours were truly impressive," the Count praises. The protagonist thinks that at least he was capable of recognizing how cool that kick had been. "It was like a red rose and a white rose spinning together in the wind," Philip adds, completely captivated. Who wouldn't fall for a strong woman like that? Embarrassed, the protagonist realizes that Philip ended up seeing her petticoat. Because of that, Ellen turns her back on him and says that she is leaving. The Count calls after her, asking her to wait a moment. The scene then shifts, and Mild asks whether the protagonist would not be better off visiting a hospital. The Countess agrees that she probably should. The knight then steps away and declares that he will go bring the carriage. After the adrenaline leaves her body, Ellen realizes that she truly overdid things in her current condition. However, Ellen's shadow returns and informs her that the carriage is gone. The protagonist immediately asks how far away it is. Concerned, Higor explains that it is not very far, but considering Ellen's condition, it would still be a long walk for her. The Countess replies that it is fine and that she can manage. Still insisting, Mild says that walking will be difficult for her and asks her to allow him to help. The protagonist grants permission to her loyal knight. "You should have mentioned that you were injured." Ellen hears the voice and quickly turns around. Seeing Philip arrive on horseback, the protagonist asks why she should have told him that. With a serious expression, the Count says that if she had told him, he could have helped her. However, Ellen asks, "If what you're saying is true, then why are you looking at me like that?" Deep in thought, Morris wonders whether he is feeling remorse over a woman he is divorcing. He quickly pushes aside his hesitation and asks her to get on the horse, saying it would be better for her to return to the mansion and receive proper treatment. Stubbornly, Ellen replies that she is going to a hospital to receive the treatment she needs. In response, Philip says that he will escort her there instead. Even so, the protagonist says that his horse is too cramped and that it would be better if she did not ride with him this time. The Count questions her about that, since according to him, Ellen always wants to ride together with him. However, the protagonist replies that charming as Philip's suggestion may have been, she is going to decline it today. Not quite understanding, the Count asks what suggestion she is referring to and what exactly she means by that. Ellen, meanwhile, mutters to herself, "This can't be happening." Then the protagonist explains that she means Philip is merely a supporting character in her life, and since they are in the process of divorcing, it would be best for them to keep some distance from each other. After pausing for a moment and then turning toward Mild, the nobleman orders the knight to take his horse, submit a report to the guards, search for the carriage, and escort Ellen to the medical center. Giving a slight bow, Higor accepts the order. Lightly extending his hand toward his wife, Morris invites her to leave with him as well. Suddenly, the Count scoops her up into his arms, causing the protagonist to let out a startled reaction internally. Because of that, Ellen asks what Philip thinks he is doing. He replies that it does not matter whether he is a main character or a supporting character in her life, because this is the fastest way for them to get where they need to go. The protagonist exclaims that this is embarrassing. The Count immediately asks what she means by that. Ellen responds that she was merely speaking without thinking and that she does not want him talking to her. However, Philip persists and asks whether his wife is feeling any better, prompting her to repeat that he should not say anything to her. At the health center, the doctor treating Ellen explains that she only suffered a minor inflammation. Examining the bandages that have already been applied, the doctor says that the Countess should feel much more comfortable now. Ellen thanks him for his help. A few moments later, Mild appears and informs his lady that he found the carriage. The protagonist says that this is good news and that they should leave immediately. Then, almost like an intrusive thought, Philip grabs his wife once again, leaving her surprised all over again. With her eyes wide open, Ellen asks what her husband is doing. Smiling, Philip simply replies that she looked uncomfortable. Still in disbelief, the protagonist admits to herself that she thought Philip hated Ellen because he was the very same man who had been desperate to obtain a divorce as quickly as possible. Before, the Count openly showed how displeased he was to be around her, but now his actions are making the protagonist's heart beat faster for no apparent reason. She had imagined that he would carry her to the carriage and then return to his horse, but instead all of this happened. The Count then asks her to move over a little, and Ellen asks why he is getting into the carriage. Settling himself comfortably, Morris replies that he is also going to the boutique. Turning toward the Count, Mild asks whether that is really appropriate. In an intimidating tone, Philip asks whether he needs to repeat himself. Without even attempting to argue, the knight accepts it and says that he understood perfectly. Upon arriving at the boutique, the owner welcomes them, saying it is an honor to receive their visit, and immediately shows them where they can sit. Morris asks her to bring whatever she personally recommends, and the woman assures him that she will do so. Our protagonist then remembers hearing that VIP customers shop differently, because in places like this, the products are brought directly to them whenever they ask. The woman quickly returns with the merchandise and explains that it is a recently released aphrodisiac perfume based on the scent of the rugosa rose. Holding the perfume, Ellen wonders about the idea of an aphrodisiac fragrance. After trying it, she comments that the scent is very pleasant. Astonished, Philip asks whether he really heard Ellen say that she liked the perfume. Gently, the protagonist replies that she did and asks whether Philip would also like to try it. The Countess then asks why he reacted that way and whether he did not like the scent. Morris replies that it is not exactly that and asks once again whether she truly liked the perfume. After receiving another confirmation from Ellen, Philip explains that it is the first time he has ever seen her smile so innocently. It is also the first time she has not immediately begun complaining about something. Ellen then thinks that she always forgets that she is supposed to be the villainess. Trying to smooth over the situation, the protagonist asks when she ever did such a thing and claims that the perfume must be casting some sort of spell on her. Smiling, the boutique owner comments that people say whoever first smells the perfume's top notes will fall into a 1,000-year love with the nearest person of the opposite sex. Immediately tossing the perfume away, the Countess questions this claim of 1,000 years of love and asks whether it is actually a magical perfume. Thinking about it, the protagonist realizes that if that were true, she would be in trouble because the closest man to her right now is Philip. According to the original story, the Count marries a woman named Dalanera after divorcing Ellen, and if that is the case, she wonders whether she would end up suffering from unrequited love. Jumping to her feet in irritation, Ellen exclaims that the woman should have warned her about something so important before she opened the bottle. The perfumer quickly tries to calm the Countess, saying that she did not mean it quite that way. Madame Hedy explains that the idea comes from a novel called The Magical Perfume, in which an extremely expensive fragrance appears. It is known as the most wonderful smelling perfume in the story. Ellen asks about the novel, and the owner explains that Lord Enor had the author write it as a way of promoting the perfume. Indignant, the protagonist wonders whether they even have that kind of marketing here. Thus, Ellen comments that she was shocked because she genuinely thought it was a magical perfume. She immediately becomes annoyed with herself, wondering what on earth she had been thinking to imagine such a thing. Afterward, she asks Hedy to put the perfume away and show them the next item instead. The perfumer agrees and says she will do so immediately. The scene shifts, and we are shown a magical fabric that is genuinely enchanted and therefore extremely expensive. Its ability is to relieve pain quickly, making it popular among the wealthy. However, Ellen has doubts about whether the product is truly effective. Knowing this, the protagonist asks Philip why he does not use the fabric if he is aware of its magical properties. The Count replies that such a thing is useful only when someone is truly unable to stand because of pain and that it is merely a luxury item, nothing more. However, Morris comments that Ellen seems quite familiar with the fabric. Confused by the direction of the conversation, the protagonist cannot remember who Lord Renor is in the novel, whether he is Ellen's father or brother. She therefore decides that her only option is to play dumb in order to navigate the situation. Thus, she asks whether they are considered her relatives by any chance. Tossing the magical cloth aside, she asks the shop owner to show her the next product. Presented with two parasols, Ellen examines them and finds both of them very beautiful. With that, the Count tells the merchant to wrap them up and she promptly agrees. However, Ellen had only been planning to buy one of the parasols. Holding a fan, Ellen wonders whether she should take a look at that one as well because she finds it adorable. The shopkeeper quickly explains that its primary material is ivory from elephant tusks, of the same quality as the ivory supplied to the king. Our protagonist asks whether there are enough elephants in the region to make fans like that. The saleswoman replies that there certainly are not and that elephants are on the verge of extinction. Upon hearing that, Philip remarks that it seems his wife likes the fan. Ellen confirms that it is beautiful but says that she has no intention of using something made like that. Morris asks what she means by made like that, and the Countess replies that elephants are killed in order to produce the material. The Count immediately questions her because Ellen used to love ivory and used it whenever she had the opportunity. Once again, the protagonist finds herself confused about the preferences of the character whose body she has taken over. The Count explains that ivory is one of the most profitable products in the territory. Even so, Ellen cannot remember whether that detail was mentioned in the novel or if she has simply forgotten it. Despite that, the protagonist says that it does not matter what she thought before. What matters is that she does not like it anymore, because driving elephants toward extinction simply for ivory is a practice that is horrible even to imagine. Surprised, Morris admits that he never expected to hear such words come from his wife's mouth. Continuing, Ellen comments that if it were up to her, she would create a law protecting elephants and put an end to those cruel hunts. Have you always felt that way? The Count asks. Rising from his seat, he instructs the merchant to send everything Ellen purchased to the Morris estate. Bowing respectfully, she assures him that she will do so. Turning his attention back to his wife, Philip informs her that he must leave first and asks her to enjoy the rest of her shopping. The protagonist does not understand her husband's sudden change in attitude and admits that it is making her uneasy. Turning to Mild, she asks what is wrong with the Count, but the knight cannot answer either. Reflecting on it, she assumes that her companion probably would not know. However, she soon receives the explanation that the ivory trade is one of the Count's principal businesses, and that he himself recently participated in an elephant hunt. With that explanation, the Countess realizes that she accidentally threw several uncomfortable truths directly in Philip's face. For a moment, she wonders whether she should apologize and explain that she did not know. However, she remembers that they will be divorced soon anyway. At that moment, Higor calls out to his lady, and she asks what happened. Was that a divorce strategy? Mild asks, leaving both of them speechless in the room. Back at the mansion, Philip reflects on Ellen's words that killing elephants solely for their ivory is so cruel that she cannot even imagine it, and that if it were up to her, she would create a law to protect the animals and ban all hunting of them. Confused, the Count asks himself why his own wife was one of the strongest supporters of the ivory trade. Wasn't she the one who said that wild elephants were large, filthy creatures that should be eradicated from the region? He also asks himself whether she was not the very person who suggested that starving elephants in captivity would make them easier to hunt. Morris cannot understand this change in behavior that began immediately after the divorce papers were signed. Don't tell me she hated me all this time and only pretended to love me, Philip wonders. But he quickly dismisses that possibility, because Ellen had been utterly obsessed with him throughout all 10 years of their marriage. In any case, the Count reflects, judging by her recent behavior, she genuinely seems to be looking forward to the divorce. Yet he feels strangely unsettled. He had believed that every trace of affection he once had for her was long gone. And yet, in that moment when he held her in his arms, his heart nearly leapt out of his chest. He cannot imagine what on earth he was thinking. He is certain that she must be plotting something to manipulate him. Holding a stack of documents, he also realizes that only now is he beginning to see how remarkable Ellen can be. Though Philip himself does not consciously realize it, he is a man who deeply admires people who possess great strength. Hesitantly, he even considers pretending not to notice anything and abandoning the divorce altogether. But his sense of duty will not allow him to do that. The Count reflects that he needs to stop thinking about it. Right now, the future of the family is at stake. He knows that he is too old to suppress the rebels himself, and his son is still too young. And frankly, he is tired. More than anything, he wants to spend his old age in peace. Holding the letter in his hands, Morris reads that his parents accepted the land and agreed to the proposed arrangement. After the former queen passes away or the child turns 10 years old, the Morris family must adopt and raise him. However, the king's wealth continues to decline and the time has come to begin the succession process. Throwing the letter into the fireplace, Philip says that there is not much time left. In his study, the Count comments that it is time to inform the child. Soon, the heroic couple arrives, and Malbor asks his father whether he summoned him. Morris replies that he believes it is time for them to begin making preparations, leaving both of them shocked. Princess Layla of the small kingdom of Pertez was essentially a pawn in this political marriage. Although that hurt her, she gradually opened her heart to Malbor and came to truly love him. Now, however, she finds herself once again at a crossroads, facing another difficult choice. Noticing their expressions, the patriarch asks what is wrong. Malbor explains that he is worried Layla may be placed in danger. The truth is that Malbor wanted to give up the throne and simply inherit the county, living a peaceful life with Layla. But that option is no longer possible. It is already too late. Reassuring his son, Philip tells him not to worry and promises that he will assign guards to protect her. Taking advantage of the situation, the Count asks how Ellen has been treating the two of them lately. Layla replies that she has not seen her mother-in-law since the tea party, leaving him astonished. Malbor also says that he has not seen the Countess since returning from his honeymoon. The Count immediately asks again whether she has not been bothering him. After all, the Countess used to visit them every single day and start arguments over the smallest things imaginable, the Count recalls. He even asks whether they have forgotten how they used to describe the situation as hellish because it was so unbearable. This really does seem strange, but ever since you made your decision, father, the prince comments. A thought crosses his mind about how many problems they must have endured that they could not even properly express their own feelings. Then Layla confirms that Ellen has not visited her even once. Surprised, Philip asks how it is possible that she never came to see her. The heroine denies it again. In disbelief, Morris asks whether his wife at least requested that Layla come visit her and say hello. Layla once again says no and comments that thanks to that, she has been able to rest in complete peace. Stammering, the Count repeatedly asks whether that is really true. Yes, perhaps she thought I was too soft before the wedding and was trying to make me stronger, Layla replies. Completely confused, Philip wonders who would ever train someone in such a harsh way as Ellen did. Nevertheless, he admits that despite everything, this is good news. Deep in thought, the Count wonders whether Ellen might be harboring resentment over the divorce and secretly preparing her revenge. And if that is not the case, he truly does not understand her motives. Then Melbourne himself asks whether his father has considered canceling the divorce at any point during this reflection period, leaving the Count even more troubled. Hearing those words, Morris concludes that the villainess truly has changed because even the children are noticing the difference. Furthermore, he still remembers that incredible kick the protagonist landed on him. He begins to wonder whether she genuinely is no longer the person she used to be. Unwilling to give in, he tells himself that he must not be fooled again. He spent 10 entire years by her side and knows her very well. There must be some reason behind this, some hidden motive, some ulterior purpose behind this sudden transformation. This change cannot possibly be genuine, he concludes. Returning to the boutique, we find the protagonist thinking about candles and wondering whether, in the novel, scented candles became popular within the next 3 years. With that in mind, the Countess comments that she would like to buy several candles and asks where they are manufactured. The merchant replies that they are made in various places, but that the Renoir Trading Company sells the largest quantity of them. Once again, our protagonist notices that Renoir is involved and asks whether their candles are truly of high quality. The saleswoman replies that not necessarily. The main reason for their success is that they supply products to the royal palace, which makes people trust them more. With that in mind, Ellen asks whether, if she were to bring in a special kind of candle, the merchant would be willing to sell it in her shop as well. The merchant then asks what kind of candle she has in mind. Smiling, the protagonist replies that it is a trade secret. Smiling as well, the shopkeeper says that she needs to see the product first, but if it is truly that special, she will certainly sell it. Excellent. Then deliver the candles I selected, Ellen requests. Hesitantly, the shopkeeper says that she will do so. Leaving the boutique, the Countess reflects that candles do not require a large investment, so this venture may work out quite well. Curious, Mild asks why his lady is buying so many candles. She replies that he will find out soon enough. Letting his imagination run wild, the knight thinks that perhaps she is planning to build a temple or something of that sort. Less than an hour later, the candles are delivered to the mansion and placed in front of the Countess. Arriving quickly in the room, Philip asks why there are so many candles in his mansion. Our protagonist replies directly that she is starting a business. The Count immediately asks what kind of business it is and whether she is planning to sell those candles. Ellen responds that it is a secret, causing her husband to question the matter, since as far as he knows, she has never started a business before. His wife immediately retorts that he should not judge her based on his own assumptions. A thought then crosses her mind that everyone claims to have a plan, only to end up failing in business. How many people have gone through that? Surely countless numbers. With that in mind, Philip says that he is only saying it for her own good, because in the end, the money being invested is money that supports the mansion. Don't worry, I'll be investing entirely with my own money, Ellen reveals with a cunning little smile. After talking about the business, Ellen asks her husband to stop talking and simply take a sip of tea. Philip then comments that the Countess has changed a great deal since they signed the divorce papers. She asks whether she has truly changed that much, and Morris replies that, aside from her attitude toward money, she also never used to serve tea this way. Confused, the protagonist asks whether she should have called a maid to serve the tea instead. Internally, she wonders whether she has perhaps been acting far too kindly toward the Count. She then asks how they used to drink tea together. Philip asks whether she does not remember and explains that she always served the tea to him first. Once again, Ellen says that she genuinely does not remember and asks him to demonstrate exactly the way she used to do it, leaving her husband surprised and asking whether she is serious. It's not that difficult to pour tea into a cup. Can't you at least try, says Ellen. In that case, begins the Count. Like this. Twist slightly at the waist. Watching her husband contort himself awkwardly, the protagonist wonders what on earth he is doing. Continuing, Philip explains that after serving the tea, she would place a fingertip against her lips and look directly at him. Naturally, Ellen is shocked and asks whether she really did that. The Count further adds that she did it every time, even when other people were watching. Outraged, Ellen tells him he has lost his mind and that it is completely insane. Looking at her, Morris comments that she used to say it was her greatest joy and happiness. Grabbing hold of her dress, the protagonist exclaims that she does not know and remembers absolutely nothing of what he is talking about. Philip, forget the Ellen of the past. That is never going to happen again, she concludes. Turning toward the door, the Countess calls for Domingo. The butler appears and asks whether she needs anything. Our protagonist asks whether he is feeling all right, and seeing tears in his eyes, asks what happened to leave him in such a state. Moved with emotion, the butler thanks his lady, saying that it is thanks to her that he is safe and well. Seeing the situation, Ellen advises him that if he is not yet 100% recovered, he should stop and rest a little longer. However, he replies that he is not in such bad shape that he needs to stop working. The Countess then says that she wants to know about the household finances and asks the butler to bring her the ledgers containing the account balances and explain how they are organized. However, noticing Domingo's expression, she says that if he is too busy, he does not need to do it right now. The butler quickly replies that it is nothing like that. He is simply moved because it is the first time Ellen has ever asked him to do something rather than ordering him. This causes her to ask whether that was really the only reason for his hesitation. With that, the protagonist reflects and remembers that she is a villainess in the original story, and villainesses do not ask, they command. I will bring them immediately and explain everything with complete sincerity, my lady, Domingo promises. Sometime later, with the ledgers in hand, the protagonist notices that they are absolutely overflowing with wealth. That property she had wanted is practically pocket change in comparison, but what truly impresses her is Ellen's spending. The protagonist wonders how the villainess manages to spend money as if it were water. She spends practically everything she earns. On top of that, the woman accumulated debt through reckless investments and gambling. At this rate, it seems it will take at least 10 years to pay everything off. In our world, the amount spent by the Countess would be something like 80 billion won. At that moment, the protagonist thinks about how completely insane the villainess is, and how the house Philip scrimped and saved to buy ended up on Ellen's list of alimony demands. Our protagonist realizes that Morris is a true saint for only now divorcing a woman like Ellen. Interrupting her thoughts, the Countess asks Domingo whether everything she purchased is stored in the warehouse room on the 4th floor. The butler confirms that it is. Rising to her feet, Ellen says that she needs to inspect it and asks Domingo to lead the way. Upon arriving at the location, opening the door and seeing everything inside, the Countess is naturally astonished and discovers exactly the checkmate she needed. Forget starting a business. Just selling all this stuff will make me a billionaire, the protagonist thinks. With that in mind, she asks Domingo whether he could help her collect everything after the divorce. He agrees, because regardless of the circumstances, all of it belongs to her. Still unable to believe it, Ellen asks whether Philip never complained about how much she spent. The butler replies that the master always approved whatever she did, no matter how much money she spent. The Countess then asks whether he truly never said anything, even with all of this. In response, Domingo admits that Morris does not even know about everything she purchased, leaving Ellen thoughtful. As a result, she asks where her husband is. The butler replies that he is resting in his sitting room. Ellen tells Domingo to close the door because she needs to speak with the Count. The butler obeys. Leaving the storage room, the protagonist reflects that all of those possessions belong to her and that it would be better to make everything crystal clear. Arriving at the study, the Countess calls out to her husband and he turns around to answer her. As he watches her, Ellen says that she came to discuss a few matters. However, noticing that he is not looking directly at her, the protagonist tells him that he should. Still facing away, he asks what brought her there so suddenly. Ellen asks whether she is interrupting his rest. The Count replies that not exactly, and that if she has something to say, she should say it. Crossing her arms, the protagonist asks why he refuses to turn around. She then asks whether it would not be better if they spoke while looking each other in the eye. Morris finally reveals that he is not dressed very formally. Our protagonist immediately imagines the worst and asks whether he is not wearing anything at all. The Count quickly replies that of course he would not sit in his office completely naked. Ellen then says that she does not care if he is dressed more comfortably than usual, and once again asks that they speak face to face. Yet Philip hesitates again and attempts to dodge the issue. The Countess decides to take action and spins her husband's chair around to face her. "This is spinning my chair around like that all of a sudden is a bit," Philip stammers. Looking at the Count's chest, the protagonist suddenly understands why Ellen was always so clingy and constantly seeking affection from him. Embarrassed, Morris explains that he only wore this robe once because it was a gift, and that he still intends to get rid of it later. Leaning closer and closer to Philip, the Countess asks whether anyone even mentioned the robe he is wearing. Then she adds that it suits him and that the children truly have excellent taste in gifts. The Count agrees with that assessment. "I won't tell anyone about the robe, so perhaps I could," Ellen asks. "Could what?" Morris replies. "A kiss," the Countess requests. Blushing, Philip becomes confused by the suggestion of a kiss, while Ellen continues by reminding him that they are still technically married. With a faint smile, the Count comments that she always takes advantage of every opportunity she can find. Stepping back, Ellen says that if he does not want to, that is perfectly fine. However, Morris agrees and says that it will be just this one last time, while his wife watches him. Then, without hesitation, the man closes his eyes and positions himself for the kiss. Our protagonist asks him to part his lips slightly, and he immediately obeys. She then leans forward and gently presses her lips against her husband's forehead. "Philip, what was that? You looked so adorable." Ellen exclaims, laughing at the situation. "Were you teasing me?" Philip asks. Ellen immediately replies that he looked so embarrassed that she simply could not resist. Straightening his clothing, the Countess says that the robe belongs to him after all, so if he wants to wear it, that is entirely his right. Morris replies that she is correct, it is his robe. After that matter comes to an end, Philip asks what brought Ellen to him at this particular hour. She explains that she was reviewing the household finances. Awkwardly, the Count says that the finances should only prove how incompetent he is. Moving closer once again, Ellen tells him not to call himself incompetent, because honestly, it is a miracle that they have not divorced already. Morris is caught off guard by that statement, and Ellen continues by saying that she truly appreciates the fact that he allowed her to spend freely, but she questions why he let things reach such a critical state. Looking down, he comments that his wife was already stressed by the impossible mess surrounding the annulment, so all of this was the least he could do for her. "So you gave me everything you could," the protagonist concludes. Then, turning away, she praises him for all his hard work over the years and promises that before she leaves this house, she will try to clean up as much of the financial mess as she can. Bringing a hand to his forehead, Philip reflects that even when Ellen dressed up and flirted with him, he never found it particularly charming. The scene shifts and Morris senses someone's presence. He soon realizes that it is his wife again. "It's not fair that you get to wear the new robe all by yourself." "That's cheating," the protagonist comments. At this point, she is determined to finish the poor man's heart off entirely. Moving closer to her husband, she explains that she bought both robes so they could wear them together after the children had gone to sleep. She then takes his hands and asks him to come closer. "Now that you've cheated, your punishment is giving me a kiss," she says. Being ridiculously handsome out of nowhere also counts as cheating, the protagonist continues. Gently, Philip holds his beloved's chin and kisses her as though he has been suppressing the desire for a very long time. Things begin to heat up, but the instant Morris leans in for another kiss, the Countess punches him right in the face. Dazed and lying on the floor, the Count calls out for Ellen in complete confusion. Looking around and seeing that no one is actually there with him, he thinks that at the very least it was an entertaining fantasy. The poor man is practically hallucinating by now. Back in her room, the protagonist exclaims in frustration, wondering what she is supposed to do. Ellen asks herself whether she may have gone too far, considering that she merely kissed her husband's forehead. Deep in thought, she wonders whether the two of them could actually get along. However, she immediately cuts off that train of thought, reminding herself that a story is not entertaining without a villainess. After all, it is the villainess who creates all the drama in the novel, allowing the main character to achieve her catharsis. But whether that is entertaining or not, she is Ellen now. She cannot keep acting like a villain when she knows that path leads directly to her death. "I'll sell everything, start my business, give Philip a share, and leave this house. I'll also be good to the children," she decides. Getting to her feet, she tells herself that she will begin saving money tomorrow and that she can absolutely do it. A moment later, she hears someone calling for her from outside the door and identifies the voice as possibly Philip's. Holding a gift, the Count waits outside and is welcomed by Ellen, who invites him inside. After settling down, the protagonist asks what is going on. Offering her the present, Morris reveals that he came to give it to her, leaving his wife confused. He then explains that he does not think he will use it anymore. Philip says that he believes it suits her far better than it suits him. And since she will now have 3 robes of the same type, she can wear one every day if she wants. Meanwhile, the protagonist wonders whether he is embarrassed because he was caught wearing the robe. Or maybe he's afraid that if we start wearing matching robes, I'll ask for the divorce to be cancelled, the Countess reflects. He could have simply let it go. Why go through all this effort just to bring me the robe? Does he really hate wearing this outfit with me that much? With that in mind, she thanks him for thinking of her, but points out that she already owns several other robes. Then she speaks frankly and tells him not to worry. She is not going to ask for the divorce to be annulled simply because she saw him wearing the robe that was originally meant for both of them. And if it makes him that uncomfortable, she will not wear hers either. Morris, however, looks confused. Noticing her husband's expression, she repeats that he said he would not use the robe anymore. She then asks whether he is worried about what she might say if they begin wearing matching outfits. Ellen explains that she is living differently now. She already signed the divorce papers and sent them to the court. The Count merely stares at her and asks what she is talking about. "I just want to make it clear that you don't need to worry about anything. I'm not trying to carry out some evil scheme," she concludes. However, noticing the look on his face, the protagonist wonders what is wrong with her husband's expression. Covering his face with his hands, Philip tells her that she completely misunderstood everything and that this is not the reason he came there today. The Countess immediately asks what the real reason is. Morris reveals that he simply thought the robe would look very good on her. That is why he brought it to her, so that she could wear it every day and feel comfortable. Widening her eyes, the Countess wonders what that is supposed to mean. However, the Count quickly stands up, says that he should be going now, and wishes his wife a pleasant evening. After the conversation, the protagonist realizes that she sensed a certain tenderness in Philip's words, assuming she is not imagining things. She finds it strange because such behavior does not fit Morris's character profile at all. The next day, Ellen calls for her loyal knight, but it is Domingo who answers, appearing before her and asking whether she had called for him. Because of that, she says that she called for Sir Mild and asks what the butler is doing there. Domingo immediately replies that the knight is with the master at the moment. The Countess then asks why Mild is with Philip. Domingo simply answers that the knight was summoned by the master. However, the butler himself admits that it is rather strange. Ellen quickly agrees, saying that Philip rarely asks Sir Mild for anything. Thinking back on it, Domingo comments that this is true, but on this particular day, the Count summoned the knight the moment he arrived at the study. Ellen, meanwhile, wonders what could possibly be happening. With that, Domingo asks whether there is anything he can do in Higger's place. The Countess replies that it is not about that. However, she then asks the butler to summon an art dealer, preferably someone with strong financial backing. Already suspecting something, Domingo asks whether she is planning to sell something. "All of the artwork I own," she replies. The Countess then asks how long it will take. Domingo explains that the local buyer is the fastest in the region, but he is known for making very low offers. It would be better to hire a professional appraiser, even if it takes a little longer. With that in mind, the protagonist asks the butler to summon both of them. He says that he will do so. In addition, she explains that she is organizing a party for Layla and asks Domingo to help her prepare everything. The Countess says that it will be a grand celebration and that he should send invitations to every noble who might be able to attend. "Make sure everything is prepared perfectly," Ellen requests. During the afternoon, an art dealer arrives at the mansion and thanks the Countess for summoning him, promising to offer a better price than any other negotiator. Noticing the rings on the man's fingers, the protagonist immediately senses that he seems completely greedy. Even so, she asks him to follow her and says that she will show him the items. Upon arriving at the storage room, the villainess orders one servant to announce the prices while two others write down the item's name and the offered value. Examining the first piece, the dealer says that the crystal mermaid statue is somewhat outdated and offers 2 gold coins for it. Leaning toward his lady, Mild whispers that 5 years ago the statue was worth 10 gold coins. 1 gold coin is worth approximately $750. Moving on to another item, the man comments that it is a fine piece and offers 5 gold coins for it. Mild remarks that 5 years ago it was worth 4 gold coins. In fact, it was this very merchant who sold the decoration to them in the first place. Hearing that information, Ellen finds it strange that the man is offering more than he originally sold it for. Then she finally understands what is happening. The merchant is offering more than the original sale price in order to gain her trust. Afterward, he intends to lower the prices of the remaining items, making it seem as though previous buyers were less trustworthy. She immediately asks Mild to check whether there are any other pieces that the merchant sold to them in the past. Since the knight is already beside her, she also brings up the fact that Philip summoned him that morning. Sir Mild confirms that it truly happened. Our protagonist asks why. The knight explains that the Count questioned him about the divorce papers and whether they had truly been submitted with the final seal. Mild says that he told him the truth. The documents were properly sealed and submitted to the court. Deep in thought, Ellen wonders whether Morris did not believe her word. A short while later, the dealer announces that he has finished evaluating the products in that room. Ellen then asks everyone to move on to the next one. Suddenly, Domingo appears and says that it took him a little while to finish some tasks. Mild then says that he and the butler will guide the dealer, allowing Ellen to go and rest. Looking at the staff, the protagonist remembers that employees tend to become somewhat nervous whenever the boss is nearby. Because of that, she decides to take a walk and asks them to inform her once the entire inspection is finished, easing everyone's burden. The protagonist remembers that she once worked in an office herself, so she knows exactly how they feel. While strolling through the garden, Ellen notices a man pruning one of the trees. The young gardener climbs down, takes a breath, and prepares to resume his work. However, he is startled when he realizes that Ellen has been standing behind him, watching. As the young man falls backward in fright, the Countess wonders whether she looks like some kind of monster or something similar to this gardener. She remembers that it must be because of the villainous reputation Ellen has. With that in mind, she decides that she should act somewhat in accordance with that reputation and orders the young man to stand up. She then instructs him to get into position and rest several times in a row, like a military officer. Playing the role of the villainess, she orders him to do 20 push-ups. Frightened, the gardener asks whether that will be enough. Ellen asks whether he would prefer that she add more repetitions. The young man simply begs her not to use the whip. Hearing that, she wonders whether she had ever whipped him before or done something similar. Taking advantage of the situation, she asks whether he would prefer that she replace the punishment with the whip. He vehemently denies it immediately. While the gardener struggles through the push-ups, Ellen watches him and thinks that she never imagined push-ups could be so enjoyable to watch. Observing the situation, Philip wonders why his wife is punishing the gardener pied. He questions whether all the change she has shown was a lie or whether there is something more going on that he does not know about. "I'll have to find out for myself," he concludes. After completing the 20 repetitions, Hyde rises to his feet, exhausted. Still acting like a villainess, Ellen asks whether she ever gave him permission to stand up. In her mind, she would love to admire the gardener's muscles a little longer, but that would definitely earn her the reputation of being a true villainess. Approaching him, the protagonist asks whether he knows why she is doing this to him. The gardener begs for forgiveness, saying that he was wrong and that what he did was wrong. Looking down at him, she asks what exactly he did wrong. He replies that she invited him to a secret meeting and he never showed up. Startled, the protagonist clearly was not expecting that answer. Confused, the countess asks him to explain exactly what he means. The gardener explains that several months ago he disobeyed her order to meet her in the garden at midnight. Continuing, she asks whether he knows why she gave him that order. The young man replies that it was supposed to look suspicious when the master returned, so that he would become jealous and think something more was happening between them. After hearing the entire story, she thinks about how insane all of this is and wonders how many more devious schemes she will have to stomp out throughout this story. She reflects that if she ever returns to reality, she will kidnap the author of this book, lock him up, and feed him nothing but cupcakes until he rewrites the entire novel. After recovering from the shock, Ellen says that it was not about that at all, and orders the gardener to stand up. Our protagonist explains that she was simply being dramatic. The only real issue was that he had failed to greet her properly. Thus, she orders him never to try avoiding her again from now on. Hyde confirms that it will never happen again. Ellen then tells him to return to work, and he obeys, giving a long bow. As a result, the protagonist thinks about how surprisingly innocent Hyde is compared to his appearance. But his muscles really are incredible, she thinks. However, she is interrupted by a voice asking whether something amusing is happening. Turning around and finding her husband standing there, Ellen replies that it is nothing. The Count immediately counters that she must have told the gardener a very funny joke. Philip reveals that he saw everything through the window, and from what he observed, it looked as though she was treating the gardener like a pet dog and playing with him. Hearing that accusation, the protagonist wonders about the expression on Philip's face and whether she accidentally ended up doing exactly what the old Ellen had intended to do. Dramatically, she explains that it is nothing like that. She merely gave a small punishment because the gardener failed to greet her. Morris asks what she means by failed to greet me. Ellen then explains that the gardener ran off without even saying hello to her, and that is why she gave the young man a minor punishment. At the end, she asks whether there is anything wrong with that. To her surprise, Morris comments that if Hyde is being rude, then he should spend 3 days in prison to learn his lesson. Walking toward Hyde, the Count says that he will resolve the matter immediately. Wait a minute, that's not necessary, the protagonist exclaims. Persisting, Philip says that being disrespectful to the Countess is something worthy of punishment. Ellen says that she understands, but before his wife can finish speaking, the nobleman asks whether she would prefer that Hyde be dismissed instead. The protagonist cannot understand why her husband is acting this way all of a sudden and wonders whether he is still upset about what happened earlier. Thus, she replies that the matter is already settled, that Hyde said he would behave himself and that he should simply let it go. Well, since we're already here, would you like to take a walk with me? The Count asks, bringing the subject to a close. Hearing the invitation, the protagonist feels that she has no choice but to accept if she wants to get out of this situation without raising further suspicions. She promptly agrees that they can walk together. Honestly, Ellen did not think the situation was all that bad. However, she reflects that she is not going to do anything overly cheesy. After some time passes, they walk toward a nearby lake. Looking upward, Ellen asks where the sound of that bird is coming from. Spotting the bird, the Countess exclaims that it is beautiful and asks whether Morris does not think so as well. He replies that it is a blue grosbeak, and Ellen once again becomes enchanted by the animal. A little later, the villainess hears another sound and points out that it seems someone is nearby. Philip immediately counters that there is no one around. Ellen asks about the noise she is hearing, and Morris explains that a 5-colored woodpecker is right beside them building a nest. Our protagonist comments that she still cannot see it. Philip asks for her permission and lifts her onto his shoulders, leaving her startled. Holding her up, the Countess asks whether she can see it now. After spotting the woodpecker, Ellen replies that she can, but asks whether she is not too heavy for him. Laughing, Morris says that it is perfectly fine and that she can watch the bird for as long as she likes. Seeing her husband smile, the protagonist thinks that expression of his is completely unfair. Teasingly, Morris says that she is light, so carrying her is not difficult at all. Even so, Ellen asks him to put her down because she has seen enough. Still holding her, Philip reveals that this is why he was so surprised the last time. The protagonist asks what he means by that. He replies that despite being so light, she still managed to send him flying through the air. Thoughtfully, Ellen remembers the powerful kick she gave her husband and thinks that she was so disoriented at the time that she does not even know how she managed it. Lost in thought, the Count says that he was completely stunned because he could not believe she had actually hit him. But honestly, he thought it was a little cool. Ellen asks whether he thought getting kicked was cool and concludes that her husband is a complete pervert. Wanting to make things clear, Philip comments that this does not mean she should hit him again or anything like that. Thus, the protagonist suggests that they drop the subject and go somewhere else. The Count quickly says that there are pears nearby and asks whether his wife would like one. Ellen asks about the pear. Looking up at the top of the tree, the Countess remarks that it seems much too high to reach. At that very moment, Philip picks up a stone and throws it at the tree, causing the fruit to fall. Impressed, Ellen asks how he managed to do that. The Count replies that it is nothing special because he has known that trick since childhood. After picking up the fruit and washing it, he asks Ellen to sit down, and she does. Cutting the fruit, Morris says that it should be delicious. The woman thanks him for being so thoughtful. Gently bringing the pear to Ellen's lips, the Count comments that it is very juicy and asks her to eat it just like that. As she chews, the protagonist thinks that this is not bad at all. However, she tells herself that the atmosphere is becoming a little strange and she does not want to imagine where it might lead. After the sweet moment passes, Philip asks what the Countess thought of the fruit. Ellen replies that it was very good and then asks where they are going next. Morris says that their next destination is the dog kennels. Already spotting the dogs in the distance, the Count says that they are almost there. Upon arriving, an employee greets the nobleman. Philip praises the man's work and immediately asks about Blanc's condition. Turning toward a dog, the servant explains that the animal's injury is almost healed, but he is still limping slightly on his front left leg. Philip asks whether that is serious. The employee explains that the dog will survive, but he will no longer be useful for hunting. Continuing, Morris says that he understands. The employee then explains that the animal is large and eats too much, so the best option would be to dispose of him. Shocked, the protagonist does not like the idea of getting rid of the poor dog at all. Thoughtfully, the Count realizes that there really seems to be no other choice. The servant then says that he will simply put the animal down efficiently. Suddenly, Ellen raises her hand and shouts for them to wait a second. What do you mean? This dog was injured during a hunt, wasn't he? Ellen asks. The employee immediately replies that yes, the dog was struck by an elephant's front leg. So after using him for dangerous work, now that he's no longer useful, you want to throw him away? Is that it? The Countess continues. Stepping back, the young man replies that he was only following her orders. Once again, the protagonist thinks about how many messes the villainess left behind for her to clean up. The employee then explains that Blanc, Gwen, and the other dogs were named after members of the Countess's family, and the order was that if they were ever injured, they were to be disposed of immediately, under Lady Morris's own instructions. Hearing this, Philip asks whether his wife might have hit her head somewhere, because her memory has been unusually poor lately. Ellen replies that she cannot really explain what happened either. Internally, the protagonist is strangling the villainess from the novel, calling her a psychopath for naming dogs after her own relatives and then wanting all of them killed. Returning to the matter at hand, Ellen orders them not to kill Blanc, and instead provide him with proper care. Petting the dog, Morris says that he has been saved and admits that he thought he would have to secretly take him out to the countryside later. The Countess immediately asks what her husband just said and wonders whether that means he has other dogs as well. The Count confirms that he does. He then asks whether the animal might bite her if she tries to pet him. Taking his wife's hand, Philip tells her that the dog belongs to her. Encouraged, Ellen gathers her courage and pets him, commenting that the little fellow is very gentle and has incredibly soft fur. Watching the scene, Morris wonders whether this truly is Ellen. Afterward, the protagonist says that this is enough for now and that they can leave. Philip simply agrees to her request. Walking hand in hand with Philip, the Countess wonders how many of Ellen's traps are still out there waiting to be uncovered. She reflects that if she simply remains the way she is now, Morris will be able to handle the situations that arise. As for Malbor and Layla, she believes they will manage perfectly well on their own even if she never visits them. Interrupting Ellen's train of thought, the Count says that he has a proposal for her. Philip recalls the martial art his wife used earlier, causing her to assume he is talking about Taekwondo. He asks her to teach that fighting style to Layla and the other knights. The protagonist considers the matter and reflects that if she genuinely teaches those lessons properly, her relationship with Layla could improve significantly. She knows that if she manages to win over the heroine's romantic partner will naturally come along as well. Ellen then asks whether Philip truly thinks Layla would want to learn something from her. He tells her not to worry because if he is the one who recommends it, Layla will certainly agree. With that, Ellen asks how much he is offering for the lessons. Morris proposes 2 hours per session, 10 sessions per month, and 10 gold coins in total. Alternatively, if she prefers, he offers a 1-year contract and says he will include one of the houses from the list as part of the deal. Ellen pauses at the idea of receiving an entire house as payment. However, she knows that accepting an offer too easily is not the proper way to negotiate. The Countess therefore says that she will think about it, but that she intends to teach only Layla for 2 hours per day. The Count asks why she wants to teach only the heroine. Ellen simply replies that these techniques cannot be taught to just anyone. Morris then asks whether that means he will not be allowed to watch the training either. Ellen replies that he will be a small exception written into the agreement. Beaming, Philip declares that this is excellent. He then says that in that case he will give her every house on the list, leaving the protagonist stunned by the prospect of receiving all of them. A short while later, a butler arrives and announces that Sir Sunley has arrived and will be escorted to the drawing room. Upon hearing the news, Morris asks Ellen to go upstairs first, and she follows his request. Glancing sideways at her husband, the Countess reflects that he is especially kind today. She cannot tell whether it is because she prevented the injured dog's execution or because she agreed to teach Taekwondo to Layla. The scene shifts, and we see Ellen explaining that she organized the prices of the original purchases and assessed their values. Mild comments that it looks good and asks whether Ellen grouped everything together. She replies that she did. Showing him the papers, the protagonist explains that there are 452 items in total, and that the dealer should only take the ones that have been marked. About 100 items have been marked. But if you prefer a one-year contract, I'll include one of the houses from the list as well. The Count's earlier words echo in her mind. With that in mind, Ellen says that there are more than 100 items there, but if the dealer is not interested, he can simply forget about it. She then asks what the total value of the sale came to. 230 gold coins. Higor replies with a smile. Looking at the bag of gold, she knows it would be worth roughly 230 million won in the real world. She thinks about what she should do with it because she realizes it is still not enough to pay off all of Philip's debt. However, she quickly decides to use the money to invest in her own business. The Countess intends to grow that money first and then settle the debts afterward. The next day, the protagonist asks Sir Mild to find out which candle craftsmen are available. The knight says that he will do so. First of all, our reader wants to make a few scented candles herself as a test. However, she is not entirely sure whether the simple method she saw on the internet will be sufficient. Thus, Ellen begins making scented candles on her own. Pouring a liquid into a cauldron, she notices that the smell is decent, but at that exact moment, a maid arrives and informs her that it is already time for her meal. Ellen asks the young woman to bring the food to her and requests something very simple. Observing the mixture, the Countess feels that something is missing, just about 2%. While the alchemist continues making notes, Philip enters the room and asks what his wife is doing there. Our protagonist immediately replies that he does not need to know, that he is being a nuisance, and that he should leave at once, leaving the Count confused by the accusation that he is bothering her. Yes, just pretend I'm not here and keep going, she adds. After Philip is practically pushed out of the room, one of the butlers arrives and asks whether Ellen had called for him. She immediately questions Morris, pointing out that he himself said he would be busy today. The Count explains that he does indeed have things to do. However, because Ellen is acting so strangely and so unlike herself, he could not help becoming curious about the situation. Turning to the servant, Ellen orders him to summon the gardener Hyde and return the book to the kitchen. The butler promptly obeys. Confused, Philip asks what she wants with the gardener. Ellen replies that she has a task for him, but Morris need not worry because she is not going to overwork the young man. Poking her husband, the Countess once again asks him to leave and return to the duties he is supposed to be handling. At last, Philip says that he understands and reluctantly gives up. Sometime later, the gardener appears and asks whether his lady had summoned him. The protagonist asks whether Hyde knows which herbs repel pests and which flowers have calming scents. The young man replies that he does. With that, Ellen orders him to gather those herbs and flowers immediately. Confused, Hyde asks whether she means herbs that keep pests away and flowers with soothing fragrances. Coldly, she replies that this is exactly what she means and gives him 1 hour to bring everything to her, sending him into a panic. Still posing as a villainess, she confirms that she is serious and warns him that if he is late, he will regret it. Watching him through the window, the Countess concludes that he is even more naive than she originally thought. That makes him perfect for this kind of task. Later, several servants bring in some supplies. Ellen orders them to place the barrel over there and fill the container with water. As the employees follow her instructions, the protagonist hopes everything turns out the way she envisioned. Arriving with the flowers, Hyde announces that he has brought everything she requested. Ellen praises his good work and orders him to wash them in the water-filled container beside them. After the gardener obeys and does exactly as his lady requested, she comments that he must be hungry and may have some cake if he wishes. Delighted, he asks whether he can really have a piece. Ellen confirms that he may take as much as he wants. Amused, the protagonist notices that Hyde finishes an entire piece of cake in a single bite. The man truly enjoys eating. Afterward, the Countess orders the gardener not to tell anyone about what happened there. Hyde promises that he will not tell a soul. Deep in thought, Ellen remarks that now she needs to figure out how she is going to use those flowers and herbs. As she finishes her work, the protagonist hears someone talking about the master. Being no fool, she immediately assumes it must be Philip again. Peeking through the door, she wonders whether he is bored and why he keeps wandering around there. Examining the gardener, Morris remarks that he saw him leaving Ellen's workshop and that he is sweating heavily. Embarrassed, Hyde replies that he was simply doing what his lady ordered him to do. Suspicious, the Count asks what exactly she ordered him to do. The poor gardener replies that he cannot talk about it. At that moment, Ellen appears in the doorway, and Philip finally dismisses the young man. Still watching Morris carefully, the Countess concludes that her husband really did come there to spy on what she was doing. Sometime later, near a carriage, Ellen asks where the candle workshop is located, and Mild replies that it is on the outskirts of the estate, and if they leave now, they will be able to return later in the evening. However, Higor warns that it is a very remote area, so bandits frequently appear there. Mild then asks why not simply summon the candle craftsman to the mansion instead of going all the way to his workshop. Ellen explains that she wants to see the place for herself. Still, she asks whether she could bring a few guards along as well. Mild says that he will discuss it with the Count. After Higor leaves, the Countess gives some thought to the bandits in the area. Then, noticing the commotion, Ellen wonders what is happening and why Philip is there. At the scene, Morris says that he heard she needed an escort because of the bandits operating outside the estate. The Countess, in turn, says that he does not need to accompany her and that a few knights will be enough. Philip asks what exactly she means by that. Crossing her arms, the protagonist points out that her husband is busy. However, he replies that he cleared his schedule precisely because of this. Boldly, Ellen asks whether he is trying to say that he wants to escort her simply because he loves her, leaving the Count completely flustered. No way, is this serious? He can't possibly be in love with the villainous Ellen. Don't tell me he fell for me after I possessed the villainous's body. If a handsome guy like him confessed his love, the protagonist thinks. On the other side, Philip explains that the divorce has not yet been finalized. That means that if Ellen gets hurt, he will also have problems. At that moment, the protagonist also remembers that she is still the Countess and realizes that her imagination has gone far too far. Afterward, Ellen insists on taking only 2 nights with her. But Philip continues arguing that 2 nights will not be enough because it is very dangerous outside. Finally, the Countess concludes that this is sufficient and that her husband can stay home and rest. If he gets bored, he can take one of the dogs for a walk or do something like that. At last defeated, Morris says that if she truly does not want him accompanying her, then he has little choice. I gave the knights strict orders, so that means everything will be fine, right? Ellen asks. Watching the woman leave the mansion, the Count recalls that she suggested he take the dogs for a walk or something similar, so perhaps that is what he should do. Already on the roads, observing the knights, Ellen feels that Philip must have given them some kind of special instructions. Our protagonist explains that she naturally questioned them about it. However, they keep repeating that they were merely ordered to pay special attention to the Countess's safety and nothing more. And the Countess absolutely does not trust that simple explanation. Later, Mild remarks that if bandits are going to appear, it will certainly be in a place like this. Still, he admits that he honestly hopes they do not appear at all. Ellen agrees that she would prefer that as well. Unexpectedly, an accident occurs, and Hygor shouts for the Countess to be careful, warning that one of the wheels has fallen into a hole. Confused, the protagonist asks what is happening. But Mild immediately orders her not to leave the carriage. At that very moment, a bearded man shouts for everyone to stay still and hand over everything they have. Seeing that they are surrounded and that the lady ignored his advice, the knight once again asks Ellen to stay behind them. Studying the group, the protagonist questions why these people do not look like bandits. Sir Mild asks what she means. Ellen replies that they look far more like refugees than bandits. Nevertheless, Hygor insists that they will handle it, and asks her not to interfere. Raising her hand, the Countess asks everyone to wait a moment and picks up 2 baskets. Holding the baskets, the protagonist announces that there is food inside. She says they can have everything in them and that she can also give them money. The peasants look at the food and comment that it smells delicious. Offering the basket, Ellen shows that there is much more inside. She tells them that if they allow her group to leave peacefully, she can bring even more food for them. Pulling out a knife, the old man declares that he will not back down for something as small as that. Others raise their weapons as well, and one of them again orders them to hand over everything they have or he will kill everyone present. At that, Ellen's shadow steps in front of his mistress and orders her to stay behind him. However, she commands him to stand back because she will handle the situation herself. With incredible speed, the villainess kicks one of the thieves, knocks him to the ground, and immediately afterward, Mild points his sword at the man and orders him not to move. I am Countess Morris, the lady of these lands. If you attack me, the Count, who is hopelessly in love with me, will hunt down every last one of you without a shred of mercy, the Countess threatens. Shocked, the knights cannot believe what they are seeing before their eyes. Thoughtfully, the protagonist tells herself to simply maintain this pose and finish what she started. Make your choice! Either you stop this pointless banditry and receive support to settle here, or you will be eliminated by the Count and his vengeance, she continues. Stubbornly, the old man asks whether she really thinks they will surrender because of those threats. Intensifying the intimidation, Ellen says that even if all of them attack at once, they will not be a match for her knights. Just look at yourselves. Haven't you understood the situation you're in yet? She asks. The bandit looks confused and lets out a stammering, "What?" Staring at the basket of food, the bearded man hesitates while cursing inwardly. Seriously, Ellen tells him to decide what he is going to do, whether he truly wants to become the target of a merciless revenge, or whether they are going to abandon banditry and find a place to live. The man falls into thought, and the Countess says that if the decision is so difficult, then he should eat first, so that he can think more clearly and make up his mind. At that, the others comment that they should do exactly that, and that the offer sounds very good. Turning her back on them, the Countess says that while they are thinking things over, she is going to the place she needs to visit. The bearded man agrees and asks her to send the fallen young man back to him first. With his sword drawn, Mild advises against releasing the man yet. However, Ellen allows the peasant to leave in peace. After the young man returns, the protagonist says that she kept her promise, so the old refugee must do the same. Because if he fails to honor his word, next time she will personally deal with him without hesitation. Stammering, the man tells her not to worry, because he will indeed keep his word as well. Afterward, Ellen comments that they probably will not be able to use the carriage anymore, and asks Mild to simply unhitch the horses. Thus, Hygor and the other knights remove the horses from the carriage. Sometime later, the protagonist announces that she will ride together with Mild. She explains that she is not particularly eager to ride a horse, but the truth is that she does not know how to ride one. Looking at the knight, the Countess says that if it is too troublesome for him, she will find another solution, but Mild replies that it is perfectly fine. The knight kneels down, and Ellen does not quite understand what he is trying to do. He then asks whether she would prefer him to lower himself even more. The Countess wonders whether he wants her to step on him in order to mount the horse. Climbing up, the protagonist remarks that it would be easier if he simply helped her with his hands. Once mounted, she asks the peasants to take care of the other horses because they are very expensive. The bearded man says that he will send one of his men to accompany her as well, and if she even considers doing something stupid, the agreement will be cancelled. Smiling, she tells them not to worry because she needs workers, not bandits. Gathered with the others, the man reflects that if he accepts the offer too easily, he might end up becoming a slave. Looking at the basket, he asks whether they really thought he would surrender over something like this. He also figures that judging from the expressions on the knights' faces, the count does not seem genuinely madly in love with the countess. Talking to himself, the refugee calls the woman ridiculous and wonders what on earth she thinks he is. He exclaims that he should not listen to that woman because she is simply talking nonsense. Looking into the distance, the man wonders whether there is a dog coming out of the forest. Soon, someone appears and asks whether the woman the bearded man is talking about would happen to be Ellen. Startled, the thieves shout, asking who the hell he is. While I was walking my dog, I saw a carriage stuck in a hole that someone had dug, Philip explains. Radiating authority, he reveals himself as Count Philip Morris, lord of this territory. Hearing this, the bearded man reflects on the count's presence. On the other side, the nobleman says that since Blanc led him there, that probably means they were the ones who dug the hole that trapped the carriage. Analyzing the situation, the gang leader inwardly curses the count's arrival, wondering why he had to appear right now of all times. But then he considers whether they should capture the count and use him as a hostage. With a sly grin, the man concludes that it is an excellent idea, and if negotiations fail, they can simply take the money and run. He then openly confirms to the count that they were indeed the ones who dug the hole to stop the carriage. Noticing the empty basket, Philip asks what he is doing there. Then on impulse, he draws his sword, calls them bastards, and declares that he will not forgive them for this. Returning the focus to Ellen, the pair arrives at the house, and Mild informs her that this is the property they were looking for. Looking at the house, the Countess comments that it seems as though someone is living there. She then asks Igor once again whether this is truly the right place. He confirms that he is certain it is. Standing before the entrance, the protagonist remarks that the mansion looks haunted. Suddenly, a frightened woman opens the door and throws herself before Ellen, begging for help. In response, the Countess orders the knights to lower their weapons because they are frightening the young woman. Feeling sympathetic, the protagonist tells her not to be so afraid because they are not there to hurt her. Through tears, the blonde asks if the Countess truly came to see her in person and continues begging Ellen to have mercy on her. Desperately, she confesses that life has been very difficult and that her father is gravely ill. She promises to repay the debt as soon as possible and begs not to be sold. Our protagonist asks her not to cry because she only came to... But the young woman interrupts between sobs, saying that if she is sold, her father will die without anyone to care for him. Confused, Ellen turns to Mild, and he immediately explains that she probably borrowed money from her, or perhaps received one of her acts of generosity. The Countess promptly asks what he means by generosity. Mild requests that they step aside for a moment. He also remarks that the Count knows nothing about this. The protagonist, meanwhile, understands nothing about loans, kindness, or anything else being discussed. Lowering his voice, Igor explains that Ellen had been lending money to some of the villagers. Confused, she asks whether she truly gave money to people. The knight asks whether she genuinely remembers nothing. I really was a bit out of my mind after signing the divorce papers. Honestly, I feel like I'm fading away. My memory is a complete mess, she tries to explain. Pointing at her shadow, Ellen tells him that if she asks for explanations, he must explain everything to her. Thus, the knight reveals that she had secretly been lending money behind the Count's back. Ellen asks why she was doing that and whether she had some kind of lending business. She asks what exactly is happening now. Igor begins explaining that the subordinates she had working there were caught committing crimes and were eventually executed. Ellen then asks whether that means everything is over. Mild replies that it is not necessarily over, merely suspended. He says that the record should still exist somewhere, though he suspects she does not remember any of it. Directly, the Countess points out that if she remembered, she would not be asking. Mild agrees and comments that the divorce must have been a tremendous shock to her. Some people even take their own lives in situations like that. Just imagine how devastating something like that must be for them, the protagonist remarks. Even after the conversation, the poor woman remains on her knees, begging the Countess to show mercy and forgive her debts.
Stop crying. If you keep throwing this tantrum, I'm gonna get irritated and make you repay that debt right now.
The protagonist threatens. The blonde immediately looks up at her with a confused expression. Get up and wash your face. We have something very important to discuss, says the Countess. Inside the house, Ellen is impressed by how well the property withstands the wind. Entering the home and taking a seat, the young woman apologizes once again and promises that she will repay everything as quickly as possible. However, the Countess points out that she keeps repeating the same thing and asks exactly when she intends to repay the debt. Once again, the woman answers that she will do so as soon as possible. The protagonist then asks whether she truly believes that selling candles will bring in enough money. The blonde explains that if the Countess wishes, she will harvest wheat, sell chickens, and do anything she is told to do. Ellen asks how much she owes. The woman replies that it is 5 gold coins. Still crying, she explains that if what the Countess wrote in the letter really happens and she is sold to a tavern, her father will not survive the shock. Thoughtfully, the protagonist wonders whether she truly said she would sell the girl to a tavern and concludes that it is not much different from the behavior of a loan shark. The young woman once again begs for mercy and asks to be allowed to remain beside her father. In return, she promises to do anything she is ordered to do. Crossing her arms, Ellen asks whether the girl will truly do anything she tells her. The woman confirms that she will. Our protagonist asks whether she would still obey if she were ordered to make candles. Confused, the blonde points out that the countess herself had just said that candles would not earn enough money. Looking directly at her, the countess asks whether she will do it or not. The woman replies that she will, but that the place is far too old to be used as a proper workshop. I will provide you with a proper house, a real workshop, and a salary. Of course, I will also give you an assistant, Ellen promises. Just do what you're good at. In exchange, I will free you from your debt and allow you to earn even more money, she continues. Once again, the young woman begins to cry and Ellen shouts for her to stop. She then calls for the knight, who approaches carrying the candles. Fanning herself, Ellen remarks that it seems the fragrance still has not blended properly. Impressed, the young woman asks what these candles are and how the countess came up with such an idea. Ellen replies that it is only the foundation of the idea, but that she does not have enough skill to make something like this herself. And that's why I need a specialist, she says. Overwhelmed with emotion, the craftswoman exclaims that this is truly a blessing from heaven and that Ellen can leave everything to her. In conclusion, Ellen says that in that case they can begin by drawing up a service contract. On the other side, after thoroughly beating everyone up, Philip asks whether they are not actually bandits but refugees and whether Ellen told them to wait there. Kneeling on the ground, the bearded man replies that yes, the countess, in her immense kindness, showed compassion to them when they were starving. Hearing that, Morris finds it impossible to believe that any sort of mercy could have come from Ellen. The man then continues explaining that the countess left those baskets of food and departed to take care of her responsibilities. Philip recalls that his wife really has been acting strangely lately. Even so, the nobleman still cannot believe that a woman like that could undergo such a drastic change so suddenly. Understanding the situation, the refugee realizes that he needs to come up with another story, or they will all be in trouble. Thus, he calls out to the count and declares that everyone present is a soul saved by the grace of the countess herself, thinking that serving the countess is better than dying in a remote place like this. Watching the man, Philip reflects that he has no idea how cruel Ellen truly is. Afterward, the leader of the peasants says that if they had known Morris was the countess's husband, they would have bowed the very moment he arrived. However, Philip points out that he already told them who he was, and they challenged him anyway. At a loss, the old man realizes that he made a serious mistake. Because of this, he explains that he thought the count was an imposter, someone pretending to be him. Gripping his sword tightly, Philip reflects that he does not trust a single word the man is saying, but he does not know what to think since Ellen is nowhere to be found. Noticing something, Morris asks what all the commotion is about. At that very moment, a group of bandits appears. One comments that they left the forest for 3 days and already beggars have taken over the place. Another asks whether there is a woman among them. The last one asks who the strange man with the dog is, apparently assuming he is the leader. Are you the mountain bandits who have been causing trouble around here lately? Morris asks. Mockingly, the criminal replies that he is not a bandit and should instead be called Lord Bandit. Drawing his sword, he orders everyone present to hand over all their possessions. Philip then remarks that the bearded man was telling the truth after all. In that case, the bandits will be the ones receiving the face of retribution. Without hesitation, the count strikes one of the criminals and then kicks another directly in the face, instantly leaving him disoriented. He immediately raises his sword toward a third man, placing him in a hopeless position and impressing the refugee leader. After finishing the job, Morris orders the bandits to be tied up. Sometime later, with the criminals already captured, Philip asks the bearded man when Ellen said she would return. The man replies that she said she would probably be back within an hour. At that very moment, the count becomes uneasy, imagining Ellen arriving and seeing the entire situation. Because of this, he asks the leader not to tell the countess that he was there when she arrives. He then asks them to make it appear as though they were the ones who fought and captured the bandits. In exchange, I will recognize your achievement and provide you with official resident identification within my domains. Do we have a deal? The count proposes, leaving the peasant deeply moved. The only condition Philip imposes is that Ellen must never find out he was there. Bowing deeply, the man replies that he has never even seen the count in his life. Thus, Philip wonders whether, if he remains silent, Ellen truly will never discover what he did. But then he thinks that if she finds out he defeated all the bandits by himself, perhaps, just perhaps, she might start looking at him differently again. He immediately imagines his wife staring at him in amazement and calling him the coolest man of all. Then he comments that thinking about it that way, perhaps he should have just told her it was him after all. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed narrating it. Philip is very clearly falling for her all over again and doing a terrible job pretending he isn't. But what do you think? Does he deserve a second chance after spending 10 years married to an Ellen who is practically a walking disaster? And what about Mild? That boy swore to protect Ellen for the rest of his life. But if he discovered that the person he swore to protect isn't really the same Ellen anymore, do you think he would still keep that promise? Tell me everything in the comments. I really want to know what you're all thinking. And if you want more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss any new uploads. The name of this series is My Ex-Husband Wants to Reconcile, and today's recap covered up to chapter 17. Kisses, and see you next time.